About 4,000 years ago, the unending war against mankind and the demigods was at its peak. Mankind's savior Lucas stood against the demigod lord. In this world, 9th Circle magic is the pinnacle of human achievement. But even with that, Lord overpowered Lucas and imprisoned him as a punishment for daring to stand against the demigods. The brave story of the 9th Circle mage Lucas transcended through generations, and now in present times, a young man suffering from his high school bullies got really tired of them trying to cancel his breathing rights, and even his father disowned him because he was weak. He decided on a voluntary exit into the afterlife, but at that moment, something unexpected happened, causing the fates of the great mage Lucas and the trash son Frey to strangely become intertwined, giving Lucas a second chance at life, 4,000 years into the future. Though for Lucas, nothing had changed. His true goal remained the same. He needed to find a way to take down the demigods and write their names off history. But this body he inherited was fragile and lacked the ability to control magic, and so his first priority was to regain his strength as a refined mage. Lucas centered himself, urging his mind not to be hasty. He decided to discard his immediate urges and quell his burning rage, recognizing that for the moment, he only needed to focus on what he could realistically achieve. Consequently, Lucas meditated throughout the entire night. When he finally regained full awareness that morning, he opened his eyes slowly. The effect of his focus was immediate. His body discharged a reasonable and high amount of mana, indicating that he had reached the 5-star rank within just one night. While this progress was remarkable, he suddenly felt a strange urge in his stomach and coughed blood onto the ground. He huffed and puffed as he realized these were the impurities Frey had accumulated, specifically the substances Frey had taken during his attempt to leave this world behind. Lucas noted that he needed to expel all of them, leading him to cough repeatedly until every impurity was purged from his system. As the students headed toward the academy later that day, Jake noticed how David's early arrival stemmed from him wanting to torment Frey, leading him to jokingly caution his friend against breaking the boy's fragile body. This caused Jake to reflect on the previous day's severity, mentioning that he had spotted Frey fleeing the infirmary with a large quantity of sleeping pills. David questioned if those were truly for an attempt on his own life, resulting in Jake suggesting that the boy might actually end everything because of their treatment, placing a bet of 10 lunch tickets for if he would take the pills. Apparently the other day, David threatened Frey that he'd mess him up in the upcoming practical test, since Frey was paired to go against David. Which leads us back to Lucas. Meanwhile, Lucas had finally disposed of all the impurities, leaving the ground covered in blood. He noted that the task was finished and looked up at the school building, acknowledging the terrible life and the fair share of troubles Frey had experienced. Feeling starved, Lucas headed to the academy trainee canteen where everyone watched in surprise. He munched and ate everything he could get his hands on, marveling at how delicious everything tasted since he had not eaten for 4,000 years. After eating, Lucas walked toward his class, wondering if he was truly supposed to attend lessons with children given his actual age of over 4,050 years. He realized he had no choice because he could not make up for a 4-millennium gap with Frey's knowledge alone. He needed to understand how the modern world functioned to gain more knowledge about the demigods. He arrived at the door and calmed himself, deciding not to rush. Upon opening the door, he looked into the classroom and felt a chilling sensation as everyone stared back. David called out that he had won 10 lunch tickets, while Jake complained, asking why Frey could not even finish the job properly. They continued to make fun of Lucas as he walked toward his seat. He noticed David's legs extended in an attempt to trip him, but he simply looked down. David looked up and told him he was finally there. Lucas felt confused by the greeting. But then Jake grabbed his head and demanded 10 lunch tickets. Jake tapped his back heavily and mentioned that he had lost his tickets because of Lucas, so he should be paid back. Lucas wondered who this person was to hit him. Suddenly, Lucas noticed his body was shaking. Noticing that Lucas was not paying attention, Jake screamed and raised his hand to strike him. Instantly, Lucas disappeared and reappeared behind Jake, shocking everyone in the room. As Jake turned, Lucas recognized that these children were the ones who had forced Frey to give up on living. Jake grabbed the back of Lucas's head again and thrust his hand forward to strike. In response, Lucas used magic to push Jake through the space, causing him to hit the wall and pass out as blood spewed from his face. This caused the students to murmur in confusion, asking why he was sent flying and noting he was unconscious. Lucas looked at the grounded boy with annoyance, thinking it was embarrassing to have used such force on a child. Feeling embarrassed, Lucas walked past David, who stood stunned. David wondered what Frey had just done, believing it was impossible for him to be capable of such things. One particular lady, Isabella, looked at Lucas with shocking admiration. Suddenly, the teacher, Professor Dio, walked in and asked about the cause of the uproar. Seeing the unconscious Jake, the professor realized these were traces of martial skills used with mana. He noted that there shouldn't be anyone with this much talent even among the professors, and wondered who could have done it before dashing out to assist the student. A substitute, Professor Kevin, entered and announced that Professor Dio had left to take care of trainee Jake, so he would supervise the class. He told everyone that Jake was merely unconscious, and they should be at ease. However, Professor Kevin began looking mainly at the female trainees with a strange smile. Someone in the crowd noted to a friend that she really disliked the professor, calling him a dirty pig who grinned at female students. Her friend whispered back for her to be quiet and avoid eye contact so she wouldn't be targeted. Professor Kevin walked up to Lucas and remarked how odd it was to see him attending all his classes. Lucas realized Frey must have been busy ditching classes, and asked the professor to be lenient, mentioning he had been busy. This caused the students to murmur about how sickening the situation was, knowing the professor bullied Frey. The professor asked if there were things more important than his class, and Lucas smiled, stating that seemed to be the case and noting he was at an age where children were sensitive to everything. The students wondered what Lucas was talking about, while the professor noted he was not a condescending man who thought his classes were the only priority. However, he told Lucas that since he had been following the content, he would give him a quick quiz. He warned that if Lucas failed to answer a single question, he would have to take responsibility for his defiant attitude. He then asked Lucas to name 3 items used by the Magic Warrior King, Kasajan. Lucas looked up in surprise, asking if he had just said the name Kasajan. About 4,000 years ago, deep within a dense forest, the greatest warrior, Kasajan, focused his spirit for training. He folded his fists and took a deliberate stance before punching the air with such immense power that it triggered a massive explosion, sending a shockwave through the woods and devastating a mountain in the distance. To Kasajan, such a display of force was like child's play, yet Lucas, watching from nearby, advised him to train with moderation, noting that he might erase every mountain at that rate and would have to be the one to look after the wild animals once they lost their homes. This observation caused Kasajan to turn back toward Lucas in surprise. You could easily spot the excitement in Kasajan's face. Later, as they sat at Kasajan's home, Lucas watched his friend continue to train and asked if he really intended to prioritize practice when a friend had come to visit for the first time in years. Kasajan simply told him that the tea was prepared and he should drink it, a blunt answer that Lucas found very annoying. Lucas remarked that such a muscle-headed man would never find a wife if all he did was train, causing Kasajan to exhale and claim that Lucas did not understand the heart of a woman either. Kasajan walked toward him, explaining that love and affection were merely evil thoughts, and that those who could not tame their desires would never truly be able to stand. Lucas pushed the warrior, but Kasajan countered by stating that a martial artist must see women as mere rocks, asking if things were different for a mage like the great mage Lucas. After a calm pause, Lucas admitted that as long as a woman was pretty, he did not mind the rocks, before Kasajan told Lucas once more to drink his tea. In the present time, the memory of his old friend caused Lucas to tear up, leading him to bang his hand on the table as he marveled at how the muscle-headed Kasajan had actually succeeded in becoming a famous figure known as the Magic Warrior King after 4,000 years. His sudden outburst drew the attention of Professor Kevin, who asked if something was wrong. The students began to whisper among themselves, believing that Frey was certainly in trouble since the records of such ancient history were not clearly written. Isabella suddenly intervened, apologizing to the professor but pointing out that the question regarding Kasajan did not seem related to the history of magecraft they studied in class. Lucas noted her soldier-like manner of speaking despite her pretty appearance, which caused Professor Kevin to walk toward her. The professor argued that because Kasajan only used mana to enhance his physical body and was a martial artist, he could not be called a magician. He then asked Isabella if she intended to insult every practitioner currently training in the magic warrior technique, to which she replied that she merely believed her words were an innocent interpretation. Lucas felt that the professor's use of the word insulting was ironic, as he remembered how the real Kasajan would fight to the death if anyone called him a magic warrior instead of a martial artist. Professor Kevin then told Isabella that the situation could become an interesting debate and suggested they hold it privately in his laboratory, just the two of them. When he reached out to grab her, she struck his hand away and asked him to stop, surprising the professor with her resistance. He remarked on her perceived disrespect, but before this awkward situation could escalate, Lucas immediately listed the 3 items: the Tiger King's glove, the Giant's belt, and the gill necklace. This accurate response stunned Professor Kevin. Lucas smiled and explained that Kasajan was a minimalist, so those were the only items he ever used. He added with a light heart that he had told the man to pay more attention to fashion trends, but was ignored. Realizing everyone's eyes were on him, he asked if he was wrong, but the professor was forced to admit the answer was correct. While Lucas felt a sense of satisfaction, the other students began to murmur that Frey was acting very odd and weird today. Professor Kevin, still annoyed, turned his focus back to Isabella, stating she lacked respect and manners. He grabbed her by the arm and ordered her to follow him to his laboratory, an action that greatly annoyed Lucas. He called out to the professor, asking if he knew the words the magic warrior King Kasajan used to say, about how love and affection were evil thoughts that ruined a martial artist's composure. Lucas repeated the warrior's belief that those who fall for their desires and forget their duties are worse than lowly beasts. The professor was shocked and asked Lucas what he was trying to say, resulting in Lucas replying that he was simply repeating the warrior's philosophy. He added a subtle jab, mentioning he had been thinking that perhaps Kasajan was wrong, seeing as the professor was standing perfectly on his feet while holding onto the lady's hand despite his obvious desires. This observation made the professor visibly uncomfortable and furious. He screamed Frey Blake's name, creating an atmosphere of intense tension in the room. He then told Lucas that he shouldn't lose his mind just for answering one question correctly, and warned that if he got even a single future question wrong, he would face the consequences as a trainee of the academy. With that threat, the professor prepared to ask the next question. Some time had passed, and Professor Kevin stood in a state of absolute shock that mirrored the faces of every student in the classroom, because Lucas had answered every single complex question correctly. The professor's legs nearly gave out under the weight of his disbelief, as he wondered how a young trainee could possibly know the intricate details of the light ages that even the academy's faculty struggled to comprehend, leading to a stunned silence that Lucas eventually broke by noting it was finally time for lunch. Upon the ringing of the bell, Lucas stood and asked if the professor had any further inquiries, mentioning that while the quiz had been fun, he was quite hungry. Professor Kevin watched him go, annoyed and bewildered that a young brat could possess such deep knowledge of events from 4,000 years ago, but he eventually gave in and dismissed the class. Lucas ran toward the cafeteria, shouting a quick thanks for everything as he hurried to secure his meal, leaving the professor confused while Isabella watched him with clear admiration. As Lucas walked alone toward the cafeteria, Isabella called out to ask if he was heading for lunch, but he initially ignored her and turned away. Yet she pushed forward and walked slowly behind him to keep his pace. The constant presence made Lucas feel uncomfortable, leading him to stop and palm his face before turning to ask why she was following him. Isabella calmly stated that she was also simply on her way to lunch, but Lucas found her manner of speaking quite weird, and asked why she talked that way. Once inside, Lucas plated an enormous amount of food, prompting a worried Isabella to ask if he truly intended to eat it all by himself. Lucas continued eating busily, telling her to try starving for 4,000 years, after which every meal becomes a blessing. Isabella became confused by his mention of 4 millennia and asked what he meant, but Lucas told her there was no need for her to know, questioning instead why she had been following him since earlier. Isabella insisted he not misunderstand, claiming there simply were no empty seats nearby, before asking how he had become so knowledgeable about the Light Ages, causing Isabella to explain that the Light Ages referred to the era 4,000 years ago, when the 4 great masters were active, a time when magecraft was at its most advanced and shone the brightest. Lucas paused to listen, exhaling as he realized with frustration that magecraft had actually regressed over the last 4,000 years. He worried that the demigods might have intervened in this decline, while Isabella pointed out that the 4 masters who brightened history were the magic warrior King Kasajan, the great sage Schweitzer Wilsman, the black witch Iris Fistfounder, and finally the man hailed as the strongest mage whom she aspired to rival. This revelation surprised Lucas, especially when Isabella added that Lucas Traumen was such an incredible master that if he were still alive, she would have asked for his hand in marriage. Lucas was so shocked by this that he spat out his food laughing, leading a surprised Isabella to ask what was so funny. He tried to clean his eyes and remarked that a little kid who had yet to grow up shouldn't be talking about marriage. When she grew indignant, Lucas teased that he would accept her feelings but noted he was not interested in children. Isabella found this incredibly discourteous. The surrounding students began to murmur, noticing that the proud Isabella, who consistently ranked in the Academy's top 2, was the one chasing after Frey. They noted that even the infamous David was rejected by her daily, making this sight even stranger. One student urged the others to be quiet as David himself walked into the scene, causing them to run off in fear. David glared at the pair, feeling annoyed by how irritating the boy was being today. Isabella then turned the conversation back to Professor Kevin's last question regarding Schweitzer's 3 training methods, noting that Lucas had listed assimilation, amplification, and battling. She admitted that she had only ever learned of assimilation and amplification, asking if Lucas would give her the honor of teaching her the battling method he had mentioned. Lucas, nearly finished with his meal, asked what her current stage was, and when she stated she was a competent 3-star, he found it unimpressive but noted she was talented for her age. Isabella observed that he talked like someone who had lived for a very long time, to which Lucas replied that he had indeed lived far too long. She asked if he wasn't the same age as her, resulting in Lucas giving a vague answer of yes and no. Isabella stood up in shock as Lucas had already finished his mountain meal, but Lucas just took his plate and walked off, telling her to take her time eating, but she called for him to wait, insisting he hadn't answered what the battling method was. Lucas told her to read books instead, explaining that what he possessed was not mere knowledge but experience, which might make his answers biased. As he walked away, Isabella remained stunned by his words, wondering exactly who he was. The scene shifted to an outdoor arena. An official announcement echoed through the space, clarifying that for the sake of fairness, only 1-star magic spells would be tolerated during the proceedings. This restriction filled David with a sense of predatory joy, as he relished the thought that he would finally be able to take his revenge and do exactly what he had always wanted to do to the boy standing across from him. As the instructor continued her briefing, she cautioned the trainees that although these were structured matches, they would be held personally responsible for any sustained injuries. She advised everyone to step onto the stage expecting a real-life battle, leading Lucas to lean toward Isabella and remark that the professor in charge was truly gorgeous. Isabella was struck with immediate disbelief. Lucas doubled down on his assessment, insisting that she was stunning, and suggesting that Isabella should watch and learn, as that was what the beauty of a perfect woman looked like. This left Isabella deeply annoyed, as she realized that even the protagonist's taste in women seemed strangely antiquated. The first match was called Pairing Lucas against David. As they walked up to the stadium, they locked eyes, and David asked how it felt to be in his current position. He mentioned that the weight of the moment had been torturing him, and that he hadn't been able to sleep the night before due to his excitement. However, before he could finish his sentence, Lucas walked right past him, leaving David in a state of utter shock. To the surprise of everyone watching, Lucas walked straight toward Professor Jane, grabbed her in a romantic manner, and told her that he finally understood why he had opened his eyes after his eternal slumber. Professor Jane was caught completely off guard, as Lucas explained that his return was all for the purpose of meeting her. He assured her that despite his youthful appearance, his soul had lived much longer than hers, an act that left Isabella distraught and speechless. Lucas then smiled at the professor and asked for the honor of taking her out to dinner that evening. Blushing, Professor Jane slightly pushed him away and issued a final warning for him to return to his position. Lucas countered with a proposal, suggesting that if he won the match, she should allow him to take her out. While the crowd murmured that a 1-star mage had no hope of winning against a 3-star opponent like David. Eventually, Professor Jane agreed to the stakes, promising to treat him to dinner if he emerged victorious. As Lucas walked back toward his opponent, the agreement left Professor Jane visibly uncomfortable. She felt a strange pull toward him and worried that she was embarrassing herself by letting her heart race over a mere student. Across the arena, David asked if he had gone completely crazy, noting he had no idea his tastes were so bizarre. He mockingly asked if Lucas had been trying to get the professor to cancel the match, but Lucas simply began to stretch, questioning why he would ever want to cancel. This nonchalant attitude infuriated David, who warned that since Lucas clearly didn't understand his situation, he would start by destroying his vocal cords, before slowly breaking his limbs one by one. David promised it would be fun to watch him cry out, reiterating that today would be the last day he would ever walk properly. Lucas glared at him, calmly stating that he didn't believe any 1-star spells existed that could inflict that much damage. David boasted that such a feat was possible simply because he was the one casting it. The instructor then signaled the start of the match, and the crowd erupted in cheers for David. Immediately, David called out a spell known as Stone Rage, causing the ground to rumble as the earth rose to form a levitating rock. Isabella screamed at Professor Jane, asking how such a spell was allowed when only one-star magic was permitted. The professor noted that the rules hadn't been broken, and David explained that the spell was a form of vision magic unique to his family's direct successors, which could be used even by a one-star magician under the right conditions. As David levitated with his conjured earth, Lucas noted that he was using a family symbol as a tool for bullying. David asked if he was scared, but Lucas remained unimpressed. He pulled out his own magic, a simple magic missile, and noted that it had a very nice glow as it levitated in front of his hand. David laughed at the sight, finding it hilarious that someone would try to face Stone Rage with a basic missile. Lucas simply remarked that it was the only spell the boy's body currently knew how to use. With a sudden flick of his hand, he sent the spell flying straight toward David. The missile struck David with incredible force. The impact sent David's body flying backward until he struck the ground, leaving him dazed, trembling, and shaking as he coughed on the floor. Gasps erupted from every corner of the arena as the students stared in disbelief at the scene unfolding before them. Lucas had taken David down with a single, precise shot, leaving his opponent gasping for air as the impact struck him squarely in the throat, causing his voice to fail completely. Among the crowd, a group of unfamiliar men watched the display with intense interest. One of them remarked that he had heard this was merely a C-Class practical training lesson, yet the level of skill they were witnessing suggested something far more significant. Lucas looked down at the fallen boy and questioned how he could be so shameful as to use vision magic, noting that such actions only served to stain his family name. David, however, was unable to offer a word in respect of his family's prestige. Lucas then reminded him of his earlier boasts, specifically his intent to destroy Lucas's vocal cords. As he conjured another magic missile, Lucas recalled David's plan to slowly break his limbs one by one. David glared up at him, his eyes pleading for mercy and forgiveness. In that instant, Lucas struck David's leg with the magic missile, resulting in a heavy shriek that tore through the air even without a clear voice. David extended his arm in a desperate plea for the torment to stop. Lucas simply asked what was wrong, noting that this had been David's own plan, and wondering why he seemed so unwell now that the roles were reversed. Isabella found herself barely able to watch the brutal display. She called out to Professor Jane, requesting that the match be halted since a winner had clearly been decided. The professor countered that David had not yet declared his defeat. Professor Jane reminded her that she had already defined this as a real battle, asserting that the road to becoming a mage was not one for those with half-hearted expectations, or the assumption that an opponent would stop just because things became dangerous. Lucas observed that, although David loved bullying others, he clearly did not enjoy being on the receiving end of such treatment. He expressed his anger, stating that the world was in its current state because of people like David who went around calling themselves magicians. He told the boy that for the sake of society, he shouldn't be allowed to use magic for the rest of his life. As he walked toward the cowering David, Lucas suddenly claimed he was just kidding and asked if David truly believed he would break all his limbs. He turned to walk off, mentioning that he was nice enough to stop at just the one leg out of pity. This caused David to exhale with a mixture of relief and tears, but the feeling was short-lived as Lucas turned back. He mused aloud that David did, in fact, have two legs, leading him to conjure another magic missile with a sharp smile. Despite David's loud cries for him to stop, Lucas paid him no mind and fired the spell at the second leg. High in the stands, the unknown men wondered who this first-year trainee could possibly be. The blond man among them remained silent, simply turning to walk back into the school building. Soon, the entire academy was buzzing with the news of how the individual they once considered trash had achieved an overwhelming victory. Students discussed the rumor that David had been sent back to his family with destroyed legs and vocal cords, leading some to wonder if his future as a magician was now doomed. And many felt the academy's atmosphere had improved now that he was gone. Still, they remained baffled by how such a feat was possible, wondering if Lucas had signed a contract with a devil. As Lucas walked through the school hall, he was approached by a 4-year trainee named Traumen. When Lucas acknowledged him as an upperclassman, Traumen invited him to join the Traumen rings. Lucas questioned the name, and Traumen explained that as a trainee at Westroad Academy, he surely must have heard of the assembly that represented their school. He boasted that the Traumen rings was an exclusive gathering and showed off his gold ring, claiming it was the work of a master craftsman and so pure it would leave teeth marks if bitten. Lucas thought to himself that using his name without permission felt like a gross invasion of privacy, and he began to walk away, while Traumen continued to blabber. Traumen screamed for him to wait, asking if he was insane for turning down such an elite group, but Lucas simply stated that he was good and had no interest in joining. A new voice interrupted from behind, suggesting that they wouldn't be able to convince him with such simple methods. Traumen immediately bowed, greeting the newcomer as Jun. The blond man from the stadium arrived, and as he and Lucas locked eyes, Jun introduced himself as the manager of the Traumen rings, noting that they hadn't met before. Jun continued to focus his gaze on Lucas, expressing his firm desire to invite the trainee to join the prestigious Traumen rings. Lucas met this stare with a look of complete lack of interest, privately noting that the upperclassman possessed an impressive level of composure for someone his age. Despite this observation, Lucas simply flickered his hand dismissively and mentioned that he was not interested, stating that absolutely nothing would change for him even if he were to join such a group. This nonchalant dismissal caused Traumen Milos to scream at Lucas in a fit of rage. Jun immediately silenced his associate with a vicious look, leading Traumen to offer a quick apology while Perun continued to glare at the retreating figure of Lucas. Later that evening, the scene transitioned to a different space inside a high-end restaurant. Professor Jane sat within the venue, reflecting on the promise she had made to treat the young man to dinner. Noting that while she had indeed promised a meal, she was surprised to find one extra mouth to feed. Lucas turned to Isabella and told her to leave, demanding that she put down her fork and step out, but Isabella pleaded for him not to mind her, insisting that she definitely had not followed the two of them because of any personal worry. Lucas stood up and shouted at her, asking if she could just leave, and wondering how a person could possibly be so dense. Isabella countered by stating that no matter how much she searched, she could find no information on the battling method, which led her to ask what he expected her to do when he refused to teach her himself. Lucas became visibly annoyed as she continued. Upon hearing the term battling, Professor Jane questioned if they were discussing the legendary training method of the magic warrior king Kasajan. Isabella was surprised to find that the professor knew of it as well, leading Professor Jane to explain that she had heard rumors within the Mage institution but had found no written records despite extensive research. She looked at Lucas with newfound curiosity, mentioning that if he was not merely bluffing, she would also like to hear the details from him. He chose to deflect the academic topic by walking toward Professor Jane and grabbing her, looking romantically into her eyes as he suggested that he could teach her much more interesting things instead. He whispered a suggestion that they could continue their talk in her private room, which caused the professor to wonder why she was reacting so strongly to a trainee who was 20 years her junior. As Lucas moved his head closer as if to kiss her, Professor Jane felt as though her mind and body were reacting separately. However, Isabella suddenly struck the table. She began to laugh, telling Lucas to stop acting so shamelessly toward their professor. Lucas expressed his annoyance, muttering that she was still there. Later that night, Lucas stood outside, staring into the water and contemplating the state of the world. He considered it strange that if the demigods were truly governing everything, he should be a significant thorn in their side. He had expected them to have erased all traces of human history and the achievements of his old friends. Yet, even after 4,000 years, the information regarding Kasajan, Schweitzer Wilsman, Iris Fistfounder, and Lucas Traumen remained mostly intact and only barely distorted. This led him to wonder if there were still people out there following their will and fighting back. Isabella eventually arrived and looked at him intently, appearing a bit uncomfortable. Lucas turned to her and mentioned he had a question, specifically asking who the Academy's honcho was. Isabella found the word choice childish, but Lucas clarified that he wanted to know who the strongest person was among the trainees, the faculty, and everyone else. She exhaled and noted that he never answered her questions, but Lucas promised to tell her what she wanted to know if she answered him first. This surprised her, leading her to reveal that the strongest among the trainees was Jun, while the top professors were Professor Dio Polsman and Professor Adelia. However, she added that the strongest person of all was likely her aunt, the Westroad Academy director, Lady Cirrus Trisnine. Just then, Professor Jane joined them and added that the director was a 6-star mage who had received the title of Ice Synthesis from the Emperor. Lucas noted that a 6-star was quite significant, but Professor Jane continued by explaining that while a mage's stage can theoretically reach 9 stars, the last person to achieve that was from 3,000 years ago, and even that remained a subject of debate. She mentioned that 8 stars was generally considered the highest attainable level, with fewer than 10 great mages in history ever reaching it, making 9 stars a mere legend. Lucas looked out at the academy, thinking to himself that the person who installed the protective spell over the school was likely the director as well. Professor Jane agreed that it was a probable conclusion, though Lucas realized privately that the spell was far too complex for a 6-star to have placed. Remembering Peru and June's earlier offer, Lucas felt that something was strange and decided that Lady Cirrus Trisnine might know something important, concluding that he must meet her. He initially intended to ask Isabella for help, but stopped himself, realizing that as long as he remained unsure of the demigod's influence, he could not involve an innocent child. He considered that he might even have to suppress the director himself depending on what he found. He then suggested that he should at least reach 7 stars first. This claim shocked both women, with Professor Jane stating that reaching 7 stars would take 10 years at a minimum, and more likely 20. Lucas casually remarked that if he trained hard enough, he should be able to reach that stage by the time the school vacation ended. They were stunned by his words, but Professor Jane eventually laughed it off, suggesting that it was good to aim high, and that perhaps his bluff would become reality one day. Lucas turned back to her with a piercing glare that surprised her before he walked toward her and grabbed her softly. He told her that his dream was not the only big thing he possessed, claiming his love was equally huge, and asking if she would check its form for him. But Isabella interrupted the affectionate moment by humming loudly. She warned them to be careful, stating that if they kept acting shamelessly, she would report the behavior to her aunt. This caused Lucas to sigh in annoyance, muttering that this was exactly why he didn't like little kids. Isabella screamed in protest, while the professor agreed with Lucas's sentiment, further fueling Isabella's frustration. Amidst the shouting, Lucas remained in deep thought, concluding that there was no need to rush and that the quickest way to succeed was to do what he could for now, without making any mistakes. 2 long weeks had passed when David walked into the school once more, his voice echoing through the halls as he screamed for Frey. He called the boy a bastard and questioned how he had dared to hurt him, insisting that he did not know what shady trick had been used, but maintaining that there was no way a piece of trash like Frey could ever truly defeat him. Eventually arriving at the spot where Lucas was sitting, Lucas was slowly and gently reading a book, appearing entirely unbothered even as David stood over him, vowing to make him regret being born and promising to order all the other boys to join in the retaliation. However, before David could finish his threats, Lucas released a magic missile. The spell sent David flying through the air until he fell shamefully to the ground, passing out instantly in front of everyone. This display of force resulted in David being sent back to his family yet again, this time to properly rearrange his nose. After the session ended, Lucas walked through the hall, feeling a sense of deep disappointment. He thought to himself that while he had not expected much from these students, he believed they should at least possess some shred of class given their enrollment at the prestigious Westroad Academy. He felt himself in a bind, realizing he desperately needed more practical experience to become accustomed to handling mana within Frey's body. Just then, a voice called out to him, addressing him as the white-haired dude and demanding he stop, insisting that they needed to talk. When Lucas turned, he found himself being led to an underground space where a group of other boys waited, looking ready to deliver a beating. Their leader identified himself as Alex, an upperclassman who demanded praise and claimed he could destroy a brat like Frey with a single scratch. Alex questioned what exactly Lucas did to David, and demanded payment for the smashed legs and broken nose. Lucas wondered to himself if the boy was actually attempting to insult him. He asked for clarification, questioning if he was currently being bullied, which only caused the man in front of him to grow more indignant. Alex demanded that Lucas show respect to his upperclassmen, asking if nobody seemed important to him now that he had dealt with David. Lucas simply yawned as the man continued to boast, claiming he had reached round 16 in the previous magic competition, and warning that today would be Lucas's funeral. Lucas noted that the boy seemed to be doing nothing more than singing praises to himself while threatening a lone underclassman with a group of friends. Alex told him not to be afraid, claiming the others were only there to spectate. Tired of the posturing, Lucas fired a magic missile that sent Alex flying into his companions, causing the entire group to tumble to the ground. The onlookers were shocked to see that 2 of the 3 men had been neutralized by a single basic spell. When they began to scream in anger, Lucas offered a half-hearted apology, mentioning that he had suddenly realized how silly the situation was and wondered why he was even bothering with children. The insults from the group continued, but Lucas paid them no attention. He began systematically firing more magic missiles, dealing with every trainee who rushed toward him. It became almost comedic as he dismantled the entire group in less than 10 minutes. He thought to himself how meaningless the encounter had been, feeling that they were just a bunch of foolish kids, and worrying that he might get infected by their stupidity if he stayed too long. Later that evening, The scene shifted to the library, where Lucas sat reading. He found the information in the books before him to be useless, which left him feeling quite annoyed. Isabella arrived shortly after, asking what exactly he had been doing lately. She mentioned that he had been creating bloodbaths with his magic missiles everywhere he went, informing him that the other trainees had started calling him the Death Missile. Lucas thought the nickname was quite embarrassing. In a fit of frustration, he scattered the items on his table and asked what he was supposed to do when there was never an opportunity to use spells stronger than a simple missile. As he vented, Isabella looked down at him and found him surprisingly attractive, even when he was making such a ruckus. She couldn't help but think how cute he appeared in his annoyance. Lucas eventually asked what she wanted, and she explained that she had followed his previous advice. She mentioned that while she knew Troll's blood increased efficiency when engraving circles, his idea of mixing it with magical essence in a proportional way had been a true breakthrough. Lucas suggested she try using half Troll's blood next time, explaining that the specific strength of a troll is better diluted within their blood. Isabella agreed that this was an extreme breakthrough and asked what he would teach her next. Lucas looked at her, wondering when he had actually started tutoring her in the first place. He decided that since she was a talented child, he could potentially raise her to be a 7 or even 8-star mage if he trained her properly. He told her that he would discuss the battling method this time, which left her visibly surprised and excited. He informed her that he was leaving to train during the vacation, and that if she came with him, she would see the battling with her own eyes. However, he warned her that it would be a harsh journey where she could lose her life, advising her not to go if she lacked confidence. Isabella responded instantly, pleading for him to take her along on his training journey. It was finally time for them to head off, and Isabella had packed everything she could possibly need. However, Lucas Traumen was genuinely shocked by the mountain of luggage she had brought along, mentioning that they were not exactly going camping and asking what she intended to do with all of those items. Isabella screamed in response, asserting that women simply have a lot of necessities that a man would never understand. She then shifted the conversation to their destination, asking where exactly they were headed. Lucas confessed that he was not entirely certain, but was considering the Hispania Mountains. Isabella repeated the name in surprise, noting that the range was a famously dangerous place, often referred to as a paradise for monsters. Lucas simply agreed and asked if she knew how to get there. She dropped her heavy bag. Producing a map, she explained that it would take half a day to reach the mountains, once they arrived in Hispaniola via a warp stone. She cautioned that the road to the mountains was tough and teeming with dangerous creatures, leading Lucas to ask if she was scared. Isabella told him not to look down on her, insisting that she had never expected their journey to be an easy one. Lucas looked at her, trying to hide a smile as they began to move, but he eventually asked for clarification on the device she had mentioned. Isabella explained that a warp stone was a device used for long-distance movement. Lucas noted how convenient such a thing was, remarking that nothing of the sort existed 4,000 years ago. When Isabella questioned the mention of 4 millennia, Lucas paid her no mind, privately observing that while magecraft seemed to have stalled, technology had been steadily improving. He mused that this focus on convenience might be why the trainees' skills were so poor. Isabella noted that the cost was a significant drawback, as using such a device was quite expensive. When Lucas asked for specifics, she explained that it would cost roughly 10 gold. This caused Lucas to scramble through his belongings, only to realize he had but a single gold coin left. When Isabella asked what was wrong, Lucas silently cursed the penniless state of Frey's noble background. He quickly realized, however, that Isabella was also a noble and likely possessed significant wealth. As she asked if he was feeling unwell, Lucas suddenly saw her true value and grabbed her hand, calling her Belshan, and asking how much money she had on her. Isabella was shocked by the sudden change in his behavior, and informed him that she had no money at all. Annoyed, Lucas told her to go home and fetch some money, but she insisted they could not, as managing without funds was part of the training itself. This caused Lucas to grumble about the absurdity of her saying that while carrying such an enormous bag, though Isabella maintained that her necessities were a different matter entirely. Lucas eventually grumbled that things might work out if they headed to the capital first. He asked Isabella if she had ever held a job, to which she admitted she never had. Eventually they arrived at the sea dock and were astonished by the massive size of the ship before them. Lucas noted that the passage was free, and Isabella confirmed that Academy trainees traveled without charge, which explained the long line of students waiting to board. As they waited, Lucas expressed his hope that the food would be good, specifically wondering about the meat. Isabella mentioned that she had heard the ship served only top-quality food, which resulted in Lucas drooling at the mere thought. However, upon reaching the front of the line, they were informed that the ship was full. This was a shocking blow to Lucas, especially when the man in charge mentioned the next departure was not for another 4 days. Lucas fell to the ground in despair until they were offered a spot on a smaller vessel called the Corteso. Having arrived too late for the better option, they had no choice but to board. They looked at the grand ship they had missed with a mixture of fury and longing. The man in charge mentioned that the ship would not stop at Geothanbul but would reach its destination in 5 days, free of charge for trainees. Lucas thanked him and accepted the arrangement. The scene then shifted to a different space, where a group of pirates was discussing their plans. One of the men told his captain that everything was ready, leading the captain to declare that they would move that night to make it a memorable occasion. The captain asked one of his men why he had plucked his own eye out, to which the man laughed and claimed it was a pirate symbol to have only one eye. The captain called the act batshit crazy, but the man noted that none of them in the Blood Red Raiders were in their right minds. Pointing at a map, the captain identified their target as the ship stopping at Geothanbul, planning to strike as it passed the Oscar Archipelago. When a crew member asked for the ship's name, the captain threatened to destroy his remaining eye if he didn't pay attention, identifying the target as the Corteso, a ship filled with children from rich families. Upon boarding the Corteso, Lucas and Isabella were welcomed by Captain Mark Martinez. Isabella thanked him for his care, noting that without this ship, they would have been stuck for days. She observed that despite the ship's impressive appearance, there were very few passengers, and asked if there was a reason for the lack of crowds. The captain explained that because the ship passed the Oscar Archipelago, pirates sometimes appeared. Isabella was surprised, but the captain told her not to worry, mentioning that they were escorted by 2 warships, each carrying a 4-star battle mage from the Magic Tower. He asserted that no pirate would succeed against such a defense. Isabella felt relieved, as the captain instructed, noting that if the pirates had any brains, they wouldn't aim for a ship protected by the Empire. Suddenly, a strange sensation washed over Lucas. The peace was shattered by screams as pirates were spotted. A loud sound erupted from the sea as the pirate warship revealed itself, and everyone, including Isabella, was shocked by its massive presence. Lucas glared at the approaching vessel, but the most terrifying realization was the fate of their protection. In less than a minute, the 2 escorting warships had already been sunk. A few minutes prior, the pirates had been observing the vessels through their stethoscopes. One of the men beside the captain had pointed out the 2 warships and asked for orders, but the captain had told him to be quiet, asserting that a special guest would deal with them. Behind the captain, a man exuding an ominous aura began to chant. The captain explained that this was a guest he had worked hard to invite, specifically identifying him as the Lich, Lord Dullard. The captain informed his crew that Lord Dullard was an exceptional being who would assist with their raid. This revelation caused the pirates to feel frightened, leading the captain to tell them to remain calm. One man admitted that while he had only heard of undying beings in stories, seeing one for real gave him the chills. He mentioned that he had previously thought the captain was going batshit crazy for attacking a ship escorted by warships, but the captain warned him to stop talking unless he wanted to lose his second eyeball and become blind. The man quickly changed his tone, praising the captain as a pioneer for making a contract with a lich, and noting that he would surely leave his mark on pirate history. At that moment, the lich's spell reached completion, and massive ice spears began to fall from the sky, targeted directly at the warships. The battle mages on board caught sight of the attack and were visibly shocked, but they both instantaneously used their magic to try and cushion the blow. They expanded their shields to the limit, but the force of the ice spears was too great. The spears broke through the magical barriers and pierced the hulls, causing the shields to shrivel and the ships to fall. The warships were instantly swallowed by the ocean, resulting in the pirate leader laughing and telling his lads to go make some money. The crew celebrated behind him, while the captain expressed his admiration for Lord Dullard's power, noting that he had destroyed 2 warships with a single hit. The Lich turned toward the captain with a look so terrifying it caused the pirate leader to shrivel in fear. Lord Dullard stated that he had actually summoned 3 ice spears, questioning how one of the ships was still floating. The captain responded with forced respect, reminding the Lich that they needed the passengers as hostages and shouldn't have attacked that specific ship. When the Lich glared at him ominously, the captain apologized instantly, privately thinking of the undead being as an irritated, bone-headed bastard. Lord Dullard explained that he had attacked the 3rd ship to prevent escape or resistance, asserting that the spell should not have been strong enough to sink it. He then mentioned that there was something powerful on that ship that had intervened. Back on the Corteso, the scene was one of chaos, as the captain tried to calm his crew and issue orders. Nearby, an individual sat puffing for breath, likely having used an immense amount of mana to protect the vessel from the descending ice spear. Isabella stood nearby, deeply uncomfortable after witnessing the annihilation of the escort ships. Lucas turned to her and grabbed her head, telling her to calm down and mentioning that they were just pirates. Isabella asked if he had been the one to intervene, noting that while she saw 3 spears, the one aimed at them had vanished mid-air. Lucas admitted that he had not, feeling annoyed with himself. He realized that, although he had sensed the mana fluctuations, he had been unable to block the attack. Lucas thought to himself that he was not so different from Frey at that moment, feeling a sense of dread as if it were a life-and-death battle. He realized that his mind had gone blank the moment he sensed a presence similar to a demigod. He felt very uncomfortable with the thought, but tried to get a grip on his emotions, telling himself that the presence was an undead man and not a demigod. When Isabella asked again who could have blocked the spear if it wasn't him, Lucas admitted he didn't know, but suggested they should thank whoever had defended the ship. Just then, the pirate ship struck against the Corteso, causing everyone to scream. The invaders began throwing ladders across to the deck, leading the passengers to run and beg for salvation. The Academy trainees were in full flight as the pirates jumped onto the deck, creating a scene of heavy disarray. One of the pirates began to count the passengers from rich families, laughing as he noted there were roughly 40 of them. Finally, the pirate leader laughed and offered a mock greeting to the trainees, calling them friends and identifying his group as the Blood Red Raiders. The captain of the ship screamed at the invaders, demanding to know if they even realized what vessel they were currently raiding. The pirate leader responded with a mocking laugh, stating that he knew exactly what it was, a treasure chest filled with the relatives of the wealthy. His crew joined in the laughter, which prompted one of the trainees to scream in defiance. The boy called them dirty pirates and insisted that they had no idea what they had gotten themselves into, claiming the ship was filled with excellent trainees who would one day become great mages. He declared that they had unfortunately chosen the wrong ship to raid and began to chant a spell. The ship's captain screamed for the boy to wait, but a dagger was suddenly thrown toward the trainee, forcing him to move and causing him to fall straight to the floor. The pirate captain laughed at the sight, mentioning that no one had ever said they would let the boy finish casting his magic. This caused the trainee to become paralyzed with fear. As he realized the blade had almost cut his neck, the entire space fell into disarray, as people began to run and scream for salvation. Lucas watched the chaos, realizing that while the knife had been aimed at the boy's neck, its trajectory had been slightly tilted by an outside force. He looked around and saw a man approaching. Wondering if this was the same individual who had blocked the initial attack on the ship, the man walked toward the fallen boy, explaining that the pirates were not an opponent he could face. One of the pirates questioned how the captain could have missed such a shot, but the leader commanded silence, claiming he had missed on purpose because the boy was a valuable hostage. He then decided to stop messing around and get serious, pointing out a boy with glasses and suggesting they use him first. Upon hearing this, the boy dropped to the ground in terror and even peed himself, leading the captain to mock him for the embarrassing display. He ordered his men to get the boy up, resulting in a pirate grabbing the trainee and heartlessly tossing him off the ship. The boy's screams for help faded in less than a minute as he went out of view and drowned. The witnesses realized that the trainee named Orca had been cruelly dealt with, and the pirate leader appeared entirely unbothered by the act. However, this cold-blooded action caused the other trainees to become enraged. As the boys began to use their magic, the pirate leader mocked their words as meaningless noise. The trainees launched their attacks, and the pirates who were unlucky enough to be caught in the crossfire were destroyed in an instant. Yet, before the magic could reach the Pirate King, a strange black aura manifested as a shield, protecting the leader. Everyone was surprised as the pirate leader began to laugh. The black aura then thrust forward toward the trainees, causing them to shrivel and run in an attempt to escape the magic. From the gathering of this dark energy, the lich from earlier formed himself in front of them. The students were terrified to see a real lich, and the undead being glared at them with emotionless eyes. Isabella screamed at the sight, while Lucas remained calm, observing the creature. The ship's captain screamed at the pirates, asking if they had truly made a contract with an undying being. He warned them that they were being manipulated, as undying beings never truly make deals with mortals. The pirate leader dismissed the warning, stating that he only cared about money, which led the ship's captain to remark that their love for money was truly insane. Lucas began to complain to Isabella, telling her to get off him because the air was hot and humid in the middle of the sea. However, as he looked at her, he noticed she was gripped by a deep fear of the pirates. He recognized the disaster before them, noting that a lich must be at least a 5-star mage, which explained why the 4-star battle mages had stood no chance. The lich then walked forward and commanded the person who had blocked his magic to show themselves, asserting that he knew the individual was among them. When no one stepped out, the lich raised his hand and manifested even more ice spears than those used in the initial attack, threatening to immediately kill everyone on the ship. The pirate king grew worried and mentioned that the lich couldn't use such power now, but the undead being turned a look on him that instantly shut his mouth. The lich repeated his command to come out. Finally, someone walked forward through the chaos. The lich asked if this was the one who had stopped his magic, and the person confirmed that it was. When the man removed the cloth covering his head, everyone, including Lucas, was stunned by the revelation. The man identified himself as Peruan Jun. The students were shocked to realize that the top student in their entire school had been the one secretly protecting the ship. When Peruan Jun revealed his face, Isabella instantly called out his name, causing Lucas to feel a brief flicker of surprise that she recognized him. She quickly explained that there was no trainee in their academy who did not know of him, identifying him as the leader of the Traumen Rings, the academy's greatest club, and the legitimate heir to the Jun House, one of the Empire's 3 most influential families. Isabella noted that although their academic grades were similar, Peruan's magical stage was likely several times higher than her own. Isabella suggested that it was undoubtedly Peruan who had nullified the lich's initial magic, leading her to believe they might truly be able to handle the situation. However, Lucas cautioned her not to get her hopes up, pointing out that the boy was likely struggling just to stand straight. Indeed, Peruan Jun was internally distraught from the sheer effort of canceling the lich's attack. Lucas observed that the undead being was at least a 5-star mage, and while Peruan seemed to have gained some recent enlightenment, he had only just reached the 5-star stage himself. Lucas considered it a miracle that the boy was even alive after canceling magic that exceeded his own power. When a worried Isabella asked if Lucas himself was at a higher stage than the lich, he admitted he was not, which struck her with a sense of dread. Peruan, meanwhile, privately regretted his choice of vessel, realizing that his plan to remain inconspicuous by choosing a ship with fewer trainees had backfired. He felt as though his body were about to break apart from the strain of resisting the lich's magic, and the creature before him felt like a towering, insurmountable monster. The lich, however, seemed pleased, noting that his luck was good to have found such excellent material as Peruan. Closing his eyes against the fear, Peruan asked the pirate captain what his goal was. The captain laughed, claiming that they were simply interfering because they couldn't help but notice precious children passing through the dangerous Oscar archipelago. He mockingly suggested that the pirates were everyone's friends and would escort the students to their destination after receiving a safe advance payment. His subordinates laughed frantically at the captain's busybody persona, but Lucas saw through the theater, realizing the entire raid was driven by simple greed. Peruan broke his silence with a suggestion, proposing that the pirates take him as the sole hostage, promising that the Jun House would pay double the expected profit if the other trainees were released. The pirate captain called him an idiot, pointing out that with Lord Dullard on their side, they could simply take Peruan's money and still profit from the others. Peruan conceded that he lacked the strength to face the lich, yet he stated with sudden confidence that he was prepared to drag the pirates into the afterlife with him. The horror and resolve he released at that moment shocked the pirate leader, leading Lucas to smile and find himself liking the boy more. He silently applauded the impressive spirit Peruan showed for his age, noting that the country's future seemed bright. The lich, however, refused the deal, declaring that Peruan's mana tasted wonderful at his current level. He released a surge of dark energy that moved with such speed that Peruan was unable to retreat. The lich vowed to absorb every drop of his mana and use his body to create a controlled undead servant. As the dark energy tied Peruan up, the pirate king laughed, declaring that negotiations had failed, and ordering his men to bring every single trainee onto their own ship. The deck became a scene of chaotic violence, as pirates dashed forward to seize the students. One pirate, laughing at his success, spotted Isabella and remarked on how cute she was. He walked toward her, asking if she wanted to play, and insisting he wasn't a bad person. He then addressed Lucas, calling him a twig and asking if the piece of unburnt firewood could move to the side. This caused Lucas to respond with sudden anger, questioning the brat's attitude. The pirate was stunned, cracking his knuckles, and suggesting that the fragile rascal needed a beating. He ordered Lucas to come to him, but Lucas stood his ground, asking who the pirate thought he was to issue such orders. The surrounding trainees, already bound by ropes, were terrified. One screamed at Lucas for fanning the flames. Jake told him to just stay quiet, but Lucas merely noted it had been a long time since they had seen each other. Impatient, the pirate pulled out a dagger, asking if Lucas knew who was the first to die in such situations. The pirate then dashed forward, swinging his blade and screaming that it was the one who couldn't read the mood. Isabella shriveled in fear, but as the pirate swung, Lucas struck him with such force that he sent the man tumbling backward. Lucas stood prepared, coolly remarking to the pirate that it seemed he did, in fact, know who died first. The pirate fell headlong into the water, leaving every witness in a state of absolute shock. The trainees wondered among themselves if this was truly Frey, the Academy's eternal loser, as Lucas Traumen was currently defying every low expectation they held for the boy. Peru and Jun watched the exchange closely, realizing that Lucas had kicked his opponent before the blade could even land. Peruan privately noted that while he knew the boy possessed talent, such a level of manipulation was almost unbelievable. Lucas turned to Isabella and tapped her on the head, telling her to hold on and watch carefully without flinching. He insisted that none of the invaders were stronger than her, aside from the Lich, and asserted that she should be able to defend herself, before walking forward to face the remaining pirates. One of the men questioned what had just happened, mockingly asking if their one-eyed comrade had tripped over his own feet because he was too horny. In an instant, Lucas dashed toward the speaker before the man could finish his thought. The Lich noticed that Lucas was moving far too fast for a normal trainee. The pirate screamed as Lucas's hand struck his chest with enough force to make him cough. Lucas told the man that they should have agreed when Peruan offered to negotiate, because, unlike the other student, he was not nearly as gentle or kind. He mentioned that despite his current appearance, he had never killed a human before, yet he admitted that men like these did not look like humans to him at all. Enraged, the pirate screamed that the boy had gained balls of steel and ordered everyone to kill him. Lucas glared at them, grabbed the neck of the man he had just neutralized, and threw the body toward the attackers. He followed this by using wind magic to push the group further away, and a fireball to blast them back. When more pirates attempted to flank him from behind, Lucas met them with another fireball, sending them flying. The pirate leader watched in stunned silence as Lucas systematically beat the crew members on the deck. The other students were equally shocked, marveling that the pirates were no match for him. One pirate tried to regain his composure by seizing a hostage. Lucas did not give him time to think. He dashed toward the man holding the hostage like the wind. Before the pirate could react, Lucas arrived in front of him and delivered a kick that sent the man flying away from the student he held. The other pirates continued their relentless assault, but as they swung at Lucas, he stepped on the head of one and twirled away. Because he moved so quickly, the pirates ended up striking their own comrade. One pirate screamed that he would kill Lucas, but as he looked up, he saw the boy in the air. Lucas manifested a massive magic missile, larger than any seen before, and fired it down at the group. The spell descended with such size that the pirates were wiped out instantly. As the dust settled, Lucas slowly returned to the ground and turned his gaze toward a man who was still holding on to Isabella. The pirate screamed at Lucas to stop fighting, calling him a monster and warning him not to lift a single finger or he would attack her. While Isabella appeared helpless at first, Lucas remained calm and asked the man what he thought he was doing. Suddenly, Isabella began to chant, making her captor visibly uncomfortable. Before he could react to her glare, she called down a lightning strike. The bolt descended instantly, causing the man to fall to the ground, coughing and convulsing. This sudden display of power shocked everyone on the deck, and even Peruan Jun was surprised by her capability. Isabella calmly walked away from the fallen pirate and approached Lucas, asking how he found her skills. Lucas winked at her, noting to himself that she was acting all gentle and innocent despite being so skilled. The pirate leader began to clap at the display of power he had just witnessed, causing Lucas Traumen to turn his attention toward him. The pirate remarked that the performance was impressive, suggesting that Lucas was surely an escort disguised as a trainee since those moves had given away the deception. He laughed as he mentioned how he had been caught off guard, but Lucas did not return the laughter because the situation was not funny. Attempting to change the tone, the pirate leader suggested they make a deal, noting that while Lucas was clearly no ordinary man, it would be difficult for him to clean up the entire situation by himself. When Lucas asked him to speak, the pirate proposed taking exactly half of the trainees as a compromise. He questioned if they had a deal, while Lucas remained silent and looked around at the people who were desperately begging for their lives. The pirate leader pressed further, claiming that Lucas should like the offer since it allowed him to save face while the pirates made some gain, calling it a win-win situation. Lucas responded by calling him rotten to the core, pointing out that calling it a win-win was absurd given that he had already killed several crew members. The pirate leader dismissed the loss of his men as no big deal and told Lucas he could personally decide which half of the students to keep. Upon hearing that they might be chosen to live, one lady screamed for the pirates to let go of her and ran toward Lucas, frantically begging him to choose her over the others. Lucas felt a sense of discomfort as more people rushed toward him, pleading for their lives and even attempting to bid for their safety. Some offered 100 gold, others 150 or 200, essentially auctioning themselves off in a display that Lucas found deeply unsettling. He turned to Isabella and asked if they should receive the money. Isabella was not having it, and screamed at him that they could not do such a thing. Lucas paused to calm himself, but then suddenly shouted to the crowd that the highest bid was 200 gold and asked who would offer 250. This caused Isabella to grow even more annoyed. The students continued to scream and compete for his attention, detailing their family status and importance to ensure they were the ones saved. Isabella was shocked by the uproar, but Lucas finally told them to stop, complaining that his ears felt rotten. He pushed away the lady holding his hand, noting how hot and humid it was at sea, and telling the brats that they had learned how to use money far too early. He asked them if it was even their own money, or if it was the gold their parents had earned through painstaking work. He expressed his disgust at trainees, who were supposed to be mages but were only focused on saving their own skins, asking if that was truly how a mage acted. His words seemed to cut through their desperation as he told them to listen well, explaining that a mage is a hero who protects the weak and must save others before himself regardless of the danger. Isabella looked at him with newfound admiration, but her confusion returned when he suddenly turned back to the crowd and asked how much they were willing to pay again, leading her to wonder if he was bipolar. Behind them, the Lich and the pirate leader observed the entire scene. The pirate leader remained quiet, but he grew uncomfortable when the Lich moved forward, wondering silently how this bone-headed undead could possibly lose to Lucas. The Lich suddenly called his thoughts nonsense, stating there was no human he could not win against. This caused the pirate leader to realize the Lich had read his mind, leading him to curse the creature internally before correcting himself and addressing him as Lord Dullard. The Lich explained that he had simply been observing, and the pirate leader realized he had to be extremely careful with his thoughts around such a being. As the Lich looked at Lucas, he noted to himself that the boy's mana shone with a glow he had never seen before. He acknowledged that while the boy was a competent magic warrior, he appeared to be only a 5-star practitioner and thus could not compete against him. The Lich then released an ominous amount of power that tore his own clothes to reveal a terrifying and ominous frame. He looked at Lucas with killing intent, which gave the pirate leader renewed confidence in Lord Dullard. The Lich claimed he had killed countless magic warriors and commanded Lucas to give up and become his. Lucas began to stretch, remarking how unpleasant the Lich talked and noting that he sounded just like a demigod. In response, the Lich instantly formed an attack he referred to as living missiles. This spell made Isabella uncomfortable as it dashed toward Lucas with frightening speed. Lucas managed to swerve and dodge before it struck, and while the people nearby tried to scatter, the attack strangely looped back to target him again. Isabella realized it was a tracking spell and shouted for him to be careful. Lucas continued to move at high speeds to avoid the missiles, but Peruanjun recognized the gravity of the situation. He realized the tracking magic moved on its own, and that the major problem was the Lich's ability to cast additional magic simultaneously. Just as Peruan feared, the Lich used bone hands, causing glowing skeletal appendages to rise from the ground. Lucas took note of the rising hands as they swiftly struck at him. The pirate leader was elated, believing he had already won the fight, while Isabella screamed Lucas's name in terror. In that moment, as the hand struck him, it appeared as though Lucas had finally lost the battle. The force of the attack was so great that it threatened the other trainees, but Isabella reacted with poise, manifesting her magic shield to dodge the impact before it could reach her. But as the dust began to settle, she realized with a start that Lucas Traumen was no longer in the spot where he had been standing. She called out his name, her voice filled with a desperate hope for an answer, while even Jun felt a surge of fear, believing that Lucas might have lost his life in the explosion. However, the situation took a peculiar turn when the living missiles that had been chasing Lucas suddenly changed their behavior and began to track the Lich himself. Lord Dullard was visibly shocked by this reversal and was forced to shield himself. The effort required such a powerful dispelling spell that he had to release his grip on Jun to focus his energy. The Lich was left wondering how such a thing was possible, as the missiles should have vanished if the gray-headed warrior had truly been destroyed. As the dust finally cleared, everyone was stunned to see Lucas standing right beside the Lich, having moved with such incredible speed that he had remained entirely unnoticed. When the undead being turned to face him, Lucas moved in perfect tandem, staying rooted in the Lich's blind spots so that he could not be seen. Annoyed by this game of shadows, the Lich sprung upward and floated into the air. Looking down at Lucas, he realized that the boy had performed those high-speed maneuvers on the unstable deck of a ship, which would have required calculating 5 different movement predictions simultaneously. The Lich felt a deep discomfort, recognizing that such a feat was beyond even his own capabilities. Isabella screamed out to ask if he was all right, and he offered a simple nod that allowed her to settle her nerves. As she watched him, she felt a strange energy radiating from him. Though he occupied the body of the one known as Frey Blake, he seemed to mirror the very essence of the legendary Lucas Traumen. Up in the sky, the Lich began to gather a multitude of ice spears, driven to a rash decision by his growing fear. He realized he had a terrible feeling about Lucas and decided he needed to destroy the entire ship instantly to ensure his own safety. Shockingly, an enormous barrier suddenly appeared over the ship, halting the ice missiles in their tracks. Lucas had easily created a double-layered barrier to protect the surface of the ship, leading the Lich to scream that it was impossible for a human to block everything. Jun watched in disbelief, noting that he had coughed up blood just trying to block a single spear. Yet this boy was shielding the entire vessel with ease. The Lich, now truly desperate, gathered the strange purple smoke from the sky to form an ice spear of incredible size, and commanded everyone below to die as he struck downward. In retaliation, Lucas bent low and thrust himself upward with explosive force. He struck the massive descending spear, causing it to shatter into fragments before it could even touch the deck. The Lich was paralyzed by the bizarre sight of Lucas arriving in the air directly beside him. Down below, Jun and Isabella used their own barriers to protect the ship from the falling debris of the shattered ice. High above, the Lich screeched that a mere 5-star chickling could never rival him. Lucas simply told him that his success was due to the fact that he knew of the path. When the Lich screamed for the meaning of those words, asking if Lucas could see the pathway beyond the 5-star stage, Lucas merely encouraged him to fight harder. He mentioned that he was actually excited to finally use spells stronger than a simple magic missile for the first time in a long while. The Lich demanded to know his true identity. Lucas responded that he was Frey Blake, the Academy's eternal loser, or at least, that was what people said. He then added that his real name was Lucas Traumen, and that he had returned after 4,000 years to educate foolish individuals like the one before him. On the deck, Jun and Isabella tried to listen, but they were too far away to hear the exchange clearly, leaving them to wonder what the two could possibly be discussing. The Lich screamed that Lucas's words were nonsense, because the great Lucas Traumen was long dead. He launched a flurry of attacks, but Lucas swiftly dashed behind him, remarking that the Lich actually looked prettier from the back. In a singular fluid motion, Lucas struck the Lich from behind and pulled out his heart, the life vessel of the undead creature. Lucas noted that because the location of the vessel varies by individual, it had taken him a moment to find the exact position. The Lich screamed for him to wait, but Lucas paid him no mind and crushed the vessel in his hand. The Lich exploded and withered away instantly. As Lucas descended back to the deck, the remaining pirates realized that they had met a disastrous end. Lucas landed behind the pirate leader, who was trembling and wondering how an undying being could have been defeated so easily. Lucas told him there was no need for further words. The negotiations were broken, and every one of the pirates would die on that ship. In less than 10 minutes, Lucas Traumen had laid waste to the remaining pirates on the ship, showing absolutely no mercy to their leader and leaving the deck in a state of ruin. Once the chaos settled, Lucas took a cool, composed stance before turning toward the survivors who had watched the entire ordeal in stunned silence. The scene then shifted to the harbor as the vessel finally reached its destination. As the passengers began to disembark, Peruan Jun called out to Lucas, praising his extraordinary prowess and expressing deep admiration for what he had witnessed. Lucas, however, paid him little attention and turned to walk away. Undeterred, Peruan called out once more and bowed respectfully, stating that Lucas had saved his life and that he would never forget such a significant favor. Isabella urged him to raise his head and not be so formal, causing Lucas to feel a bit surprised by the intensity of the gratitude. Humbling himself slightly, Lucas calmly asked Peruan how he was feeling, noting that his organs must be in total chaos after the strain of blocking the Lich's magic. Peruan claimed to be all right, mentioning that he actually felt refreshed after regurgitating the dirty blood from his system. Lucas told him to stop bluffing, while Isabella hissed from behind that he was being rude to a member of the prominent June house. Lucas simply ignored her as they continued their conversation while walking into the bustling town. Peruan voiced the question on everyone's mind, asking how Lucas had so easily defeated a Lich that even seasoned court magicians would struggle against. He mentioned having heard the name Frey Blake before, specifically that he was known as the most untalented trainee in the history of Westroad Academy. He noted that since the boy had only come to prominence in the last few days, he wondered if Lucas had been hiding his skills the entire time. Lucas merely shrugged the question off, remarking vaguely that all sorts of things happen as one lives life. Peruan did not poke further into the mystery, accepting the answer as he prepared to part ways. He extended an invitation for Lucas to visit his family home, so he could show his gratitude properly. Isabella was stunned by the offer, thinking to herself that a personal invitation from the June house was an incredible honor, yet she was baffled when Lucas replied that he would come only if he had time. As Peruan walked off, Isabella gave Lucas a mouthful, asking if he was insane for treating such an influential family so casually, when so many nobles would use any excuse just to get close to them. Lucas, focused on more practical matters, he then called out to the departing Peruan, asking to borrow about 20 gold coins. Peruan paused and turned back, leading Isabella to scold Lucas again for using a life-saving favor as a pretext to ask for money. But the two continued their back-and-forth bickering until Peruan cut in, stating he didn't mind the request but was curious why Lucas needed the sum. Lucas explained that he needed it to use the warp stone in Cow Symphony, noting how expensive the travel costs were. Understanding the situation, Peruan reached into his bag and pulled out a staggering 300 gold coins. He insisted that Lucas keep it all as a token of gratitude, and that there was no need to pay it back. This caused Lucas to be very happy, though he told Peruan that 20 gold would have sufficed. Peruan simply laughed it off, saying he had no change and told him to take it. Peruan then mentioned that while he wanted to host Lucas immediately, he was currently occupied with marriage talks regarding his fiancée and would have much to prepare upon his return. Lucas jokingly told him to stop bragging, but Peruan insisted the situation wasn't as pleasant as it sounded since his father was single-handedly making all the decisions. Lucas turned to Peruan with a strange look and asked if the fiancé had an older sister. When Peruan mentioned she was from the Lua noble family, Lucas responded that he didn't care and would even be fine with her aunt. Peruan explained that the girl was a daughter of the Aquareed house, a household famous for birthing skilled knights, and expressed worry that they might not get along. He feared they would be disappointed to find a feeble magician like himself as a fiancé. Isabella countered this by saying the Academy's top trainee shouldn't speak that way, asserting that he was not weak at all. Lucas encouraged him not to lose confidence, noting that his handsome face would certainly help him. He then told Peruan to contact him if the girl happened to have another sister or an aunt, leading Peruan to agree despite his slight discomfort. Isabella pushed Lucas along, telling him he needed to behave himself. This prompted Peruan to break into a long, strange fit of laughter, admitting that he couldn't remember the last time he had laughed like that, and calling Lucas a truly jolly friend. Much later, after walking a great distance together, the group reached the point where they had to depart. Peruan addressed the protagonist, telling him once more that he must visit the June house because he didn't want to live the rest of his life as a jerk who couldn't show proper gratitude. Lucas gave a casual affirmation, saying he would visit in the future if he had time. They shared a moment of calm as they looked at each other, and Isabella thought to herself that it was a wonderful sight, almost as if the two were longtime friends. As Peruan waved goodbye and walked off, Lucas remarked to Isabella that he was a good guy and a model of what a noble should be. Isabella agreed that he was indeed splendid, but her mood soured when Lucas added that the boy also had very deep pockets. This remark led the two to begin squabbling and shouting once more. The next morning, Isabella and Lucas arrived at a shop where she spent considerable time trying on various outfits, attempting to find something new for the journey. She repeatedly questioned Lucas on her appearance, but he flatly told her that she should simply go home. When she screamed in indignation at his bluntness, Lucas questioned if she truly intended to train in the mountains wearing such flattering but impractical attire. He advised her to choose light clothing that would not retain odors quickly and could be worn with ease. This caused Isabella to become quite annoyed, and she screamed back that she was well aware of the requirements but had simply been excited by the high-quality selection, leading the storekeeper to observe that Lucas's companion did not seem particularly accustomed to a minimalist lifestyle. Lucas privately mused that perhaps bringing her along had been a mistake. Much later, they stepped outside, having finally purchased the necessary items. They had settled on very minimalistic gear, which was well suited for the trek ahead. Lucas held a small bag in his hand and remarked on what an amazing item it was, noting the impressive nature of subspace magic. He marveled at the fact that objects 10 times the size of the bag could be stored inside. Isabella responded by asking if it was his first time seeing such a thing, suggesting there was no reason to be so surprised. When Lucas asked if she was still in a bad mood, she claimed it did not matter. Lucas exhaled as he looked around, reflecting on how much technology, like the warp stone, had developed compared to his original time. He noted that the population had increased significantly, yet he concluded that these advances were not beyond his imagination. He felt that things had barely changed in 4,000 years, and suspected that the demigods had intentionally deterred human development, wondering if they feared humans growing stronger. However, he dismissed the thought, believing those beings viewed human potential as nothing more than that of insignificant insects. Isabella interrupted his serious ruminations to announce that they had arrived at the warpstone. Lucas looked up at the structure, deciding he would eventually have to beat the answers out of the demigods. On a nearby podium, an official announced that the warpstone would soon activate and warned all passengers to stay within the magic circle. Lucas was genuinely astonished by the device, noting the impressive craftsmanship of its different sections. He warned Isabella to be careful, mentioning that those unaccustomed to warping often felt nauseous afterward. She screamed that she already knew, and asked him not to be so unrefined. Suddenly, as the warpstone activated, her body was pulled into the magic. The transition happened in an instant, and they arrived at their destination in the Hispania Mountains. Lucas looked around and realized that very little had changed in 4 millennia. He turned to suggest they get moving, only to find Isabella in a corner, vomiting from the experience. He reminded her that he had warned her about the nausea, but she wiped her face and insisted it was only because she had not eaten breakfast. Lucas remained skeptical, as she claimed she would be fine after a meal. Once more, he privately questioned the wisdom of bringing her. They entered the town and found a pub to satisfy Isabella's hunger. Lucas addressed the master of the establishment, ordering 5 servings of bread and a great deal of meat, along with some beer. This order surprised the tavern owner, and it caused Isabella to scream in a frightful shout, demanding to know if he was really going to drink beer at such a moment. Lucas told her to be quiet, asking if she realized how long it had been since he had enjoyed such a drink, and questioning why the academy didn't sell any. Isabella continued to bicker, but her complaints were cut short when the owner plated the food. The owner asked if Lucas was a mercenary, but Lucas ignored him to focus on the meal. The man continued, suggesting that since they were planning to enter the Hispania Mountains, they must be newcomers. He noted their undamaged armor and new swords, remarking that they likely felt capable of hunting a dragon, though he added that such ambition was a privilege of youth. Lucas continued to eat and drink happily, ignoring the lecture. The old man then urged them to finish their meal and return home, warning that newbies should not challenge the mountains. Isabella mentioned she had heard it was a paradise for monsters, and was aware of the danger, but the old man cut her off, screaming that they knew nothing. This caused Isabella to pause as the other patrons began to smirk, but Lucas simply kept stuffing his face. The old man eventually apologized, explaining that he had a son their age who had always wanted to be a mercenary. He said he felt he had to intervene because the sight of them reminded him of his boy. When Isabella asked where the son was now, the man revealed that he had died after entering the Hispania Mountains. He explained that his son had died escorting a mother and daughter, only the daughter had returned alive to tell of his demise. He told them he wasn't looking for pity but was warning them to give up, as even experienced mercenaries rarely came out unscathed. This made Isabella uncomfortable, but Lucas eventually exhaled, declaring the meal delicious. He asked the old man to tell them more about the monsters in the mountain range. Isabella took a bite of the food and realized it tasted very strange, but Lucas and the owner were already deep in conversation. The old man asked if they intended to go even if it meant their deaths, and though Lucas said nothing, the man gave up and decided he wouldn't sleep well if he didn't share some knowledge. He brought out a map and began to brief them. Isabella realized the situation was even worse than she had imagined, but when the briefing was over, Lucas stood up and asked for the bill. The old man refused his money, saying he would put it on a tab so they would have to come back alive to pay it. Lucas questioned if the business could survive such a practice, but the man said he heard that all the time. As they walked out into the night, Lucas thanked him for the food again, specifically praising the special sausage. The old man called him a liar, stating the place was famous for terrible food, except for the beer. He promised to prepare better sausages for their return, and they shared a warm farewell. Lucas said he couldn't wait, and the man smiled as the two travelers walked off toward the Hispania Mountains. Before Lucas and Isabella could venture deep into the mountain, they were already set upon by atrocious beasts that prowled near the entrance. Lucas laid waste to them, while Isabella proved she was far from useless by using her electrical abilities to strike down the monsters in her path. As she exhaled from the exertion, they managed to calmly eliminate the creatures that had crowded the threshold. Lucas remarked that the Hispania Mountains were truly worthy of their fame. Isabella mentioned that she finally understood why he had brought her along, believing she would learn a great deal just by training in such a place for a month. However, Lucas corrected her as he walked off, stating that fighting monsters was not the primary reason for her presence. When she asked why they were truly there, he revealed that their destination was Schweitzer Wilsman's dungeon. Isabella was shocked, recalling the legends of the great sage's remote dungeon, which was said to hold the power to rule the world. She questioned if it was anything more than a legend, but Lucas countered that, knowing Schweitzer's personality, the dungeon was likely not a simple cave. Isabella found his familiarity with the personality of a long-dead sage confusing, but Lucas was already lost in thought. He remembered Schweitzer's last words from 4,000 years ago, describing a beautiful lake with a small island at the peak that pierces the clouds. Lucas looked toward the heights and realized the summit was likely the place called Drake Mountain, and the lake at the top was almost certainly a volcano. He mused that it was a location Schweitzer would have loved, and that they simply needed to find the island there. He turned back to Isabella, admitting that while the place was a legend, it was also extremely dangerous. He informed her that one should be at least a 6-star mage to challenge it, which left her stunned. Lucas then raised his hand and declared that he would rush to the 6-star stage in just 1 month. Isabella asked if he was insane, pointing out that even with the hardest training, reaching such a level usually took dozens of years. Lucas did not pay much attention to her protest, instead insisting they find a proper, safe place to train where they could easily concentrate mana. Early the next day, after continued skirmishes with the local wildlife, Isabella was huffing from the effort of dealing with a monster. She noticed Lucas watching the surroundings with intense focus and wondered what he had found. Lucas suddenly announced that he had located their spot, leading her to a space featuring a beautiful waterfall. Isabella was wowed by the sight, thinking it was truly amazing. Behind the falling water lay a hidden cave, and once inside, Lucas lit a light bulb to illuminate the space. He declared it their training ground for the next month. As Isabella began to unpack, Lucas called out to her, promising to finally show her the battle training method of the magic warrior King Kasajan. Isabella was overjoyed, but Lucas warned her that the technique was dangerous and could lead to her death if copied incorrectly. He instructed her to simply observe, for the first time, eventually levitating as he entered a deep state of concentration. Isabella watched in astonishment as time passed, and the energy exuding from Lucas caused even the waterfall outside to look more ethereal. Lucas began gathering mana from the energy around him, drawing from the waterfall and the entire mountain range. Everything centered on his abdomen, swirling in a bright, dazzling display. Isabella realized he was absorbing mana from the whole of the Hispania Mountains, wondering if he was pushing the mana room in his abdomen to its very limits. Lucas meditated through the day and into the night. By the next morning, the mana in his belly had become incredibly refined. When he finally opened his eyes, breathing heavily, he told Isabella that the preparations were finished. To his great surprise, he looked over to find that Isabella was doing exactly the same thing, showing a level of mana control that exceeded even Lucas's high estimations. He realized her talent and passion for learning surpassed what he had predicted. When Isabella opened her eyes, she found Lucas grinning at her. He praised the girl as being pretty impressive, causing her to blush. Lucas then suggested they get something to eat, a proposal she happily accepted. Lucas opened his bag, and the contents flew out instantly as he reached for the jerky he needed, offering some to Isabella. She initially declined. Lucas insisted she eat, explaining that her brain was misinterpreting the feeling of mana repletion for satiety. He urged her to force it down if necessary, leading her to begin munching on the food. The two sat inches apart, and as she ate, Isabella found herself blushing while looking at Lucas. She admitted that until recently she had never imagined spending time with him in this manner. She mentioned that she had always been observing his unordinary willpower, even when he was just a student being bullied. She paused before noting that he felt like a different person lately. She observed that it was as if he knew exactly where he needed to go, without the slightest hesitation. Lucas asked her which version she believed to be the real him, causing her to laugh. She suggested that both versions were obviously the same person, as humans do not truly change but only grow. Lucas smiled and exhaled as she thanked him for his change, noting that previously he wouldn't have been so direct. While they spoke, Lucas began forming a mana circle around the room. When Isabella asked what he was doing, he explained that he was setting up a barrier so that it would not be a pain if monsters attempted to enter while they slept. After completing the task, Lucas laid down on his mat and told her he was off to rest, advising her to get plenty of sleep since it was only the first day. He fell asleep instantly and began to snore. The next morning, Isabella rolled her head slightly upon hearing Lucas's voice. He was already meditating and noted that she was finally awake. When she asked how long she had been asleep, he told her it had been roughly 5 hours and warned her to think of that as her last break. He announced that the real training would now begin. Lucas repeated his warning that it was an extraordinarily dangerous method and told her to watch without imitating him. He took a serious stance and began to gather mana, causing Isabella to watch the energy in his belly intently. The mana began to separate into fire and what appeared to be ice, forming a type of yin and yang shape as the attributes twirled around each other. She realized he was separating the gathered mana into contradicting attributes, forcing them to fight while keeping each other in check. It appeared as though a war was being fought within the microcosm of his body. The battle between the ice and fire energy was visible in his eyes. For a moment, the water energy seemed to overpower the fire, but Lucas immediately balanced it out, ensuring that neither attribute could dominate the other. Isabella recognized that the essence of battling was stabilizing a balance that refused to stay aligned. She was stunned by the discovery, marveling at what the method entailed. Despite his earlier warning, she centered herself and tried to imitate the process. She attempted to separate the fire and ice within her own body, but before the process could truly begin, the ice overpowered the fire. This caused her to instantly cough out blood as the overwhelming force hit her, and experiencing immense pain from the slight distortion in balance. She was amazed that Lucas could practice such a nonsensical and dangerous method as if he were simply engaging in a peaceful meditation, leading her to wonder once more about the true identity of the man in front of her. Isabella walked outside to the stream and waded into the water to take a bath. As she cleaned herself, she remained deep in thought until she finally emerged, dressed, and began placing stones upon a flat surface to track the passing days. She realized with a start that they had already spent 2 weeks in these mountains. Reflecting on the intense bodily meditation process, she looked toward the cave and noted that Lucas Traumen had not moved an inch during those 14 days. She wondered when he planned to stop practicing such a terrifying method before walking back inside, dropping her bag and turning to observe him. Lucas was deep in meditation and appeared to have achieved a perfect level of synergy from his training. Isabella recognized this as a materialization of mana, which served as clear proof that a mage was about to become a 6-star practitioner. She was stunned that he had reached such a stage in only 2 weeks, as she had never seen such inconceivable growth speed in her entire life. Inside his own mind, however, Lucas was actually annoyed. He felt his progress was still too slow, and believed he needed to move much faster and more efficiently to reach his goals. Isabella knelt in front of him to watch his steady form before eventually taking her own meditation stance to continue the battling process within her. More time passed as the waterfall continued to roar outside, eventually accompanied by heavy rainfall as they reached the 3-week mark. Inside the cave, Isabella was also approaching the threshold of her next mana circle. The strain eventually became too much for her, causing her to cough and fall to the ground. She looked at Lucas once more, noting that even the slightest lapse in concentration could disrupt the internal balance. Yet she found her own growth speed hard to believe. She felt a deep impression of the battling method, Realizing that if her ancestors had practiced such a ferocious technique, it explained why modern mages were incapable of reaching the same heights as those of the past. A sudden realization of her own terrible smell caused her to turn toward the cave entrance, where she noticed something strange. A powerful force was attempting to break through the barrier Lucas had set. In an instant, the barrier shattered, revealing a massive phoenix that had forced its way into the cave. At that exact moment, Lucas opened his eyes and stood up upon recognizing the creature. Isabella was distraught and terrified, but Lucas remained perfectly calm because this was not his first encounter with such a creature. Lucas smiled and walked toward the divine bird, an act that surprised Isabella given the known dangers of the Hispania Mountains. Lucas explained that the creature had likely been attracted to the cave by the fire attribute mana released during their battling training. He called for the phoenix to come to him, prompting Isabella to warn him to stay away, since divine beasts could not be tamed by humans. Despite the bird appearing dangerous, Lucas asked the phoenix if it was simply going to stay there, or if it intended to ask for the help it had come for. To Isabella's absolute disbelief, the phoenix stepped forward, allowing Lucas to hold it almost like a mother holding a child. She watched in awe as he stroked the feathers of the flame with his bare hands. Lucas told her that the bird showed no hostility. He pointed out a deep wound made by large claws, noting that the creature had nearly had its heart gouged out and that it was a miracle it was still alive. Isabella asked if a phoenix could actually die, to which Lucas replied that they were simply less restrained by death than other creatures, but they were certainly not immortal. These words left Isabella in a state of shock, as she wondered what kind of monster could be lurking in the mountains with enough power to inflict such a wound on a divine beast. Lucas continued to stroke the phoenix, observing that it had clearly fought against an overwhelming opponent. He spoke softly to the creature, assuring it that he could help, and patted its head with a smile. The divine beast seemed to feel more vulnerable and open under his touch, eventually laying itself upon the ground. Lucas began to channel a strange form of magic to heal the bird, a sight that caused Isabella to marvel at how the legendary phoenix was behaving like a little chick in his presence. Lucas jokingly remarked to the bird that it was taking away the fruits of his hard training, leading the phoenix to respond with soft cuckoo sounds. He quickly followed up by telling it he was only joking, and urged it to stay still while he finished the process. Watching this interaction, Isabella realized that Lucas was capable of wearing such a gentle expression. She noted that not only was his look different, but his very manner of speech had shifted, making him feel vastly different from the person she knew. As Lucas worked, his mind drifted to a memory from the past where he had teased another phoenix. He recalled asking that old friend if the day wasn't nice and chilly, and mocking the idea that a great phoenix would be weakened by a light drizzle. In the memory, the bird had made similar cuckoo sounds, leading Lucas to comment on its strong character before challenging it to a race to the mountain peak with the loser's lunch on the line. And the nostalgia of that old friendship brought a smile to his face. Returning to the present, Lucas mentioned how nostalgic the moment was, noting that his old friend had behaved just like this creature. While these words were surprising to Isabella, she chose not to question them. She watched as the deep wounds on the phoenix slowly began to heal and close. She wondered if the creature was regaining its natural healing power by recovering its energy through Lucas's assistance. Soon the phoenix rose, appearing fully healed, and let out a scream so loud that Isabella had to cover her ears. Lucas placed a hand on it once more, thanking it for helping him remember old memories, telling the phoenix to choose its opponents more wisely in the future. After a short, meaningful glare between them, the divine beast flew out of the waterfall dungeon and went on its way. Lucas looked down and noticed a feather left behind on the ground. He bent over to pick it up, noting that the bird didn't have to leave such a gift. He explained to Isabella that the feather could be used to heal injuries, produce powerful magic items, or be sold for a very high price. He tucked it into his subspace bag, remarking that the phoenix seemed to be the type to repay its debts, unlike certain people he had been sheltering for weeks who offered no help. This comment perked Isabella's ears, leading her to ask if he was referring to her. Lucas offered no answer, simply returning to his mat and sitting down. Isabella asked him if he could manage to talk nicely with humans as well. She looked at him with a mix of worry and awe, thinking that his mysterious appearance mirrored that of a divine master. She noted that he was a truly outstanding person, despite his disrespectful attitude. She reflected on the contrast between his sharp, cold-hearted demeanor and the quiet, gentle way he had looked at the phoenix. To her, his vast knowledge and mature speech made him seem like an elderly sage, possessing the depth of a flawless great mage. leading her to realize that she held deep feelings of admiration and respect for the man before her. As the month drew to a close, Lucas finally opened his eyes and exhaled deeply. Isabella watched him get up and realized that he had actually succeeded in his goal. She congratulated him on becoming a 6-star mage, noting with amazement that Lucas had hit that incredible milestone in exactly the time he had predicted. Isabella gazed at him in sheer disbelief, reflecting on the fact that the youngest person in recorded history to reach such a height was 35 years old. She felt certain that if the public ever learned an academy trainee had reached the 6th star, the entire world would fall into an uproar. Lucas took a deep breath, noting how pleasant it felt to finally be able to gather mana simply through the act of breathing, but the sudden strain caused him to fall backward. Isabella screamed out and caught him before he hit the ground. Lucas admitted that his body was in a total mess, simply because he had fasted for a week during his breakthrough. When Isabella asked if he wanted some beef jerky, he declined, suggesting they go hunt instead so he could get some oily food into his stomach. Outside, they were met with a startling sight. The area was littered with the bodies of fallen minotaurs. Isabella wondered what could have happened, quickly realizing that the phoenix they had helped was likely the one responsible for the carnage. Lucas noted that it was no wonder he hadn't sensed any monsters during his meditation, leading Isabella to feel a sense of warmth at the thought that the divine beast had been trying to protect them. She remembered how Lucas had comforted the creature, and Lucas privately thought that the rascal shouldn't have taken his parting words so seriously as to act as a guardian. He told Isabella there was no longer a need to hunt and suggested they head toward Schweitzer's dungeon after finding a quick meal. But their plans were interrupted by a loud human cry echoing from a distance. Even though he was starving, Lucas knew he had to investigate, and he dashed toward the source of the voice instantly. Isabella called after him, wondering what she was supposed to do by herself as he disappeared from sight. The scene shifted to a different area where a man was tied to a wall, weeping and pleading for his life, with a dagger embedded in the wood right beside his head. A group of bandits was playing a cruel game with him, using him as a living target. Other men, who had not been so lucky, already lay lifeless nearby, victims of the same sadistic sport. One bandit laughed at the vice-captain of the Scorched Axe bandits, mocking his terrible aim, but the vice-captain blamed his performance on a hangover before another man named Victor stepped up for his turn. From the corner, their chief barked at them to stop messing around and get moving. He expressed his annoyance at being cooped up in the irritating mountains for over a month, waiting for a specific woman to pass by. Ignoring the chief's temper, the man with the dagger bragged to his companions that he would stab the captive square in the forehead, calling for a 10-point throw. He launched the blade, and the captive screamed in terror, but before the metal could find its mark, something struck the dagger away. The blade deflected and fell harmlessly to the ground, leaving the bandits stunned. One of them laughed, teasing his comrade that the wind didn't want to help him, while the frustrated thrower complained about the interference. As one of the men walked over to retrieve the weapon, he suddenly spotted Lucas standing right in front of him. Surprised, the bandit asked Lucas who he was, and the rest of the crew grabbed their weapons in a panic. They looked at Lucas's haggard appearance from his weeks of training and mocked him, wondering if the boy was a walking corpse or simply about to die. Lucas ignored their insults, his eyes glaring as he surveyed the lifeless bodies of the innocent people they had used for target practice. He remarked with cold fury that they seemed to be enjoying themselves, using humans as dartboards. One of the bandits laughed, asking if the corpse was actually talking. But the mockery was cut short when Lucas manifested an ice scythe from the air. With a singular fluid motion, he struck the man's neck, detaching his head instantly. The space fell into a horrified silence as the bandits realized the sheer power they were facing. The leader in the corner recognized the manifestation as high-level magic, sensing the weight of a powerful mage. Lucas offered a chilling smile, greeting his new friends and stating that it was time for a lesson they wouldn't forget. Isabella ran through the forest in a frantic attempt to find Lucas, but when she finally reached the clearing, she discovered that he had already decimated the entire group of bandits. He stood there calmly looking forward, prompting Isabella to ask if he had truly killed every one of them. Lucas mentioned that he had allowed a single survivor to escape, though he had placed tracking magic on the man to follow his trail. Lucas looked down at the fallen leader and noted that they had referred to him as the vice-captain, resulting in the realization that a captain must be stationed elsewhere. She asked if Lucas planned on annihilating the entire crew, to which he replied that he could not act as if nothing had happened after they had murdered innocent people. Privately, Lucas felt a deep disgust, wondering if the demigods enjoyed watching humans degenerate by hating and killing each other. He thought to himself that he would gladly mess up their entertainment, for even the smallest thought of demigods being happy sickened him. Just then, the man tied to the tree asked if he had been saved, but Lucas told him that, unfortunately, he had lost too much blood and they were under no obligation to take him along. The man screamed and begged for his life, claiming he could not die yet, but Lucas turned to walk away. It was only when the man began to cry and mentioned wanting to apologize to his father before dying that Lucas paused and turned his attention back to him. Meanwhile, a report reached the main leader of the bandit crew, stating that their third platoon had been wiped out by a ghost. Captain Charles reacted with disbelief, asking if the messenger had drunk an entire barrel of ale, but the man screamed that it was the truth. He described a figure with whitened hair scattering in the wind and a skinny body that smelled of rot, noting that the intruder's mastery of mountain fighting had left them unable to fight back. He claimed he had seen the heads of his members flying in an instant and had barely escaped with his life. This caused Captain Charles to realize they were dealing with a magician, a conclusion supported by his subordinate, who noted that the perpetrator seemed capable of double casting. Concluding that they were facing a battle mage, the leader ordered his men to increase their lookouts and inform everyone the moment the ghost was found so they could kill him. The subordinate wondered if the Aquareed house had hired the magician, but Captain Charles dismissed the idea, stating that such a prideful family of knights would never use mages as bodyguards. He then questioned his men about a man they had been using for target practice, and the bandits apologized, explaining they had been bored. They mentioned the victim was just a random mercenary who had been escorting a mother and child. This led the leader to wonder exactly who this mysterious mage was, as a simple mercenary wouldn't have the means to hire such a powerful protector. The scene then shifted to a different area where a carriage lay scattered on the ground amidst the bodies of fallen knights. Captain Charles stood in the center of the carnage, smiling as he told his target not to look at him with such hatred because he had searched for her for a long time. Facing him was Sonia Aquareed, the eldest daughter of the prominent Aquareed house, who appeared exhausted. She held her weapon firmly. When the bandits dashed toward her, she blocked their attacks and struck them down with style, ending with a blow that sent a man's head flying. She dashed forward to attack the leader, but his subordinate intercepted her, and their swords clashed with a heavy ring. The subordinate laughed as Sonia struggled against his strength, eventually pushing her back with such force that she flew through the air, puffing and puffing from the strain. The leader remarked that he was about to fall in love, noting that she still hadn't let go of her blade, and that the rumors of the Luinoble Kingdom's flame sword were clearly not exaggerated. As Sonia took a fighting stance, the ladies beside her cried out in fear, and her surviving knight looked spent. The situation was dire, and the odds did not favor them in that moment. The nuns and the knight remained on the ground, clearly relying on Sonia Aquareed to navigate the entire dire situation. The bandit leader observed that waiting for more than a month in the infuriating mountains had been worth the effort, remarking that Sonia was every bit as beautiful as the rumors depicted. He noted her status as the first daughter of a prestigious knight's house, and mentioned her reputation for being more talented than any male heir, having received the title of Rainstorm from the king at only 18 years of age. Sonia did not pay his flattery much mind, instead scanning the area and realizing with growing dread that her escorting knights had been annihilated. With only her maid and the long-retired Sir Luthor remaining, she felt the crushing weight of her disadvantage, especially since she was the only one left capable of fighting against more than 20 skilled men. The bandit leader expressed curiosity regarding the location of her escort magician, but Sonia dismissed the idea as nonsense. She questioned if he truly believed a house with such a long history would ever use a lowly magician for protection, adding that magicians in the current age were nothing but weaklings. This led the leader to conclude that the ghost who had interfered with his underlings was not actually involved with the Aquareed family, which only made him more curious about the mysterious interloper. He then assured Sonia that they would not kill her right away, prompting her to scream for clarification. The leader suggested that it was unnecessary to spell out his intentions in such a plight, a comment that caused his men to salivate as they glared at her. He remarked on what a rare occasion it was for men of their standing to play with a noblewoman. Sonia was deeply annoyed by their behavior and screamed that she would rather bite her tongue than become their plaything. The bandit leader remained unmoved, stating that her death wouldn't change much because they would simply help themselves to the women behind her. The leader added that his boys were quite hungry after living like beggars for a month just to catch her, so he wouldn't be able to promise a nice death for her companions. Sonia was furious, finally realizing that the bandits had kept the girls alive for that very purpose. The nuns urged Sonia not to let them drag her down, demonstrating a newfound resolve. Sir Luther, despite his injuries, stated that it would be an honor to die for her. Sonia calmed herself and apologized to her followers for the misery, but the nuns found her apology upsetting. They mentioned growing up healthy through the help of the respectable Aquareed house, and implored her to end their lives with her own hands. They expressed that it would be dishonorable to reunite in heaven after having been used by the bandits. Sonia gripped her sword, her body shaking as she agreed that they should all hold their heads high and reunite in heaven with pride. The bandit leader realized with alarm what they were planning, and ordered his men to stop her immediately. She swung her blade. However, the sword descended into nothingness, striking neither the nuns nor the ground. Everyone was shocked by the sudden disappearance of the weapon. Sonia, with tears streaming down her face, opened her eyes to find the nuns still alive and safe. She was distraught and confused as to why her sword was no longer in her hand. She wondered how the Scorched Axe bandits could have stolen her blade so quickly. Feeling the deep humiliation of a knight who had lost her weapon, she apologized again for being unable to provide an honorable death and ordered the nuns to bite their own tongues. Before she could finish her command, the nuns called out to her. The bandit leader announced that the guest he had been waiting for had finally arrived and revealed himself. Lucas stood there silently beside Sonia, having intervened at the final moment. When Lucas finally arrived, the energy in the space shifted instantly. As Isabella held onto the man they had rescued earlier, the bandit leader glared at Lucas, noting that he had heard rumors of the youth and suggesting that he must have been taking good care of his boys. Lucas responded by throwing Sonia's sword back to her, before asking the man if he was indeed the leader. The bandit leader stared at Lucas's frail and wicked-looking body, pointing toward the forest to ask if he had come from their base camp and what exactly he had done to the men stationed there. Lucas dryly confirmed that he had taken very good care of them, an admission that caused the leader to become visibly annoyed. He immediately ordered his men to kill the white-headed youth, warning them not to give the mage any time to cast his spells. The bandits dashed toward Lucas, believing the reports that he was a battle mage whose strength would be limited by their superior numbers. But they were proved wrong when Lucas instantly used a wind-like spell that cut through their bodies. The leader managed to use his sword to dodge the strike, though his hands shook from the sheer firepower Lucas displayed. He watched in a stun as Lucas used his magic to toss the bandits every which way. Sonia looked on in shock, wondering who these people were and asking Isabella what their purpose was. Isabella simply offered a smile, telling the knight she could rest easy since they were not enemies. Meanwhile, the leader was pushed back heavily by the onslaught, trying to reassure himself that even battle mages were still magicians who could not maintain such a pace forever. He reasoned that there must be a cycle to the magic spells, and believed that because Lucas was casting so many attacks, he would soon fall from exhaustion or to the blades of the remaining men. Much to his surprise, his men continued to fly through the air as Lucas's attacks pierced and cut through them as if they were tissue paper. This caused the leader to feel incredibly uncomfortable, as he found it impossible that Lucas was attacking everyone simultaneously while also targeting him. He looked up to see Lucas levitating in the air, surrounded by numerous floating magic balls, and realized he had never heard of a mage capable of such a feat. Suddenly, one of Lucas's attacks pierced through the leader's defenses, breaking his sword instantly and sending him flying across the space until he landed coughing on the ground. The leader screamed for Lucas to stop, seeing that the mage had already made quick work of the majority of his crew. Only a few bandits remained, struggling to catch their breath. When the attacks momentarily ceased, the leader shouted that Lucas must be out of mana and urged his remaining men to kill him now or they would all die. Sonia also worried that his mana had been depleted and offered to help, but Lucas raised his hand and told her to stay back, warning that what he was about to do next was dangerous. Lucas then channeled a different type of magic, causing the ground to rumble violently. The bandit leader was terrified by the shaking earth as the ground began to crumble beneath them. An earthquake-like force caused the terrain to collapse, and the bandits began to sink into the crumbling earth while screaming for mercy. The earthquake swallowed them entirely, and the rocks crushed them underneath before the ground suddenly closed back up. Sonia stood beside Lucas, watching the entire event unfold in silence, as she realized Lucas had completely annihilated the bandits by burying and squashing them instantly in a gruesome display of power. Sonia cried out in disbelief, questioning how a 5-star magic spell like an earthquake could be cast while simultaneously facing a group of mercenaries. Isabella explained that the earlier strikes were merely a diversion to buy time for the more complex spell. This revelation caused Sonia to scream in response, stunned by the idea that a storm of light arrows had been nothing more than a distraction. She admitted that she had never heard of such proficiency in double casting, a sentiment Isabella shared until the day she met Lucas Traumen. Sonia found her interest piqued by the young man, noting that this was her first true exposure to a magician's battle, which felt entirely new and peculiar to her. As the dust finally settled, Sonia presented her sincere gratitude for his help, introducing herself as Sonia Aquareed of the Luinoble Kingdom. In response, the youth introduced himself as Frey Blake, though internally Lucas wondered where he had heard the name Aquareed before. Sonia was visibly surprised by the lack of courtesy in his introduction. Dazed by his bluntness, Isabella stepped in to apologize, explaining that he was still somewhat inexperienced in terms of manners. Lucas questioned what was wrong with his manners, causing Isabella to ask if he truly believed he was being polite. Nearby, Sonia asked Sir Luther if he knew of the Blake house. The knight confirmed that it was one of the houses with a highly noble lineage within the Castcow Empire, noting that the current head, Isaka Blake, was one of the Empire's 8 seven-star magicians and master of the 6th magic tower. This made Sonia wonder how a person of such noble standing could appear so haggard. Lucas asked the group where they were headed, and Sir Luther mentioned they were going to a city called Hispaniola nearby. Lucas noted that they were also headed there, and offered to guide them. The knight thanked him but pointed to the bodies on the ground, explaining that they first had to gather their fallen escort knights. He suggested that Lucas and Isabella take their leave first, since the task would take a while. When Lucas asked if they intended to bury them there, Sir Luther admitted they had no choice, as they could not transport all the bodies to the city. Lucas insisted he would take them himself. Suddenly, Lucas used his magic to levitate all the bodies, and simultaneously fixed the broken carriage as if nothing had ever happened to it. This display was shocking to Sonia, as Lucas carefully placed the bodies inside the carriage and asked if they were ready to go. As they moved toward the seaport with the carriage, Sonia suddenly screamed that she had thought he was at least 30, only to find out he was 20. She looked at him and thought to herself how strange he was, but Lucas simply remarked that it was nice to be young. Sonia was confused by his comment, but Lucas redirected the conversation to the mercenaries, noting that they seemed to have been waiting in the mountains for over a month. Sir Luther realized that a month matched the period since they had left Luinoble. He could not think of a specific culprit, noting that the Aquareed house had as many enemies as allies. Sonia added that the mercenaries must have been backed by someone with great power to have dispatched such skilled fighters. She looked at Lucas in admiration, asking how he had gained such skills and power. She admitted that she had always thought magicians were weak and evil, but that mindset had been erased today because of him. Lucas told her the answer was obvious, stating briefly that it was simply a matter of effort. This answer left her very confused. They finally arrived at the harbor and pushed the carriage toward the ship. The nuns hugged Sonia and waved goodbye as the ship set sail with the bodies of the soldiers, ensuring they would return to their families. Sir Luther expressed his sincerest gratitude, to which Lucas replied that he was glad to be of help before waving them off. Sonia grabbed onto Lucas, surprising him as she insisted on returning the favor. Lucas responded uncomfortably, saying they only needed to help each other to survive, but the knight insisted that the Aquareed house would lose face if they simply sent him away. Lucas scratched his head and looked to Isabella for guidance. Isabella smiled in acceptance, leading Lucas to agree and suggest that they buy them dinner at a place he knew that sold extremely delicious sausage. The group finally arrived at the inn they had visited on the night before entering the Hispania Mountains. Inside, the atmosphere was quite ordinary, leading Sonia to note that the establishment did not seem like a place nobles would frequent due to the heavy smoke and the general rough demeanor of the patrons. Lucas countered that it was a well-known fact that dirty and run-down places like this often served the best meals, a sentiment Sir Luther found difficult to support. Their discussion was interrupted by the owner of the pub, who defended the quality of his establishment before expressing his relief at seeing Lucas return alive. Lucas offered a smile in response, mentioning that someone else had also returned with them, much to the old man's surprise. The owner was overwhelmed with joy upon seeing his son, Kazan, standing there. He dropped everything he was holding to rush toward him, and the two began to rekindle their relationship. Much later, the father began to stitch the injuries on Kazan's body, while Lucas explained that they had already provided emergency treatment. While Kazan would need to rest for a few days, he would be fine. Lucas informed the pub owner that his son had been captured as a hostage while protecting a mother and daughter. adding that while he was unsure of Kazan's skill as a mercenary, he proved to be a much better man than his father had previously portrayed. Kazan wept before his father, expressing deep regret for their past arguments and his decision to leave. But the owner comforted him by saying that nothing mattered now that he was back safe. Isabella questioned Lucas on how he had known Kazan was the master's son. Lucas noted that they look identical. Lucas teased her, suggesting that the drag of their team possessed unexpected skills in healing magic, which clearly annoyed Isabella. She demanded to know who he was calling a drag, to which Lucas bluntly confirmed he was referring to her. He then noted that they had planned to stay at the inn, but the house appeared to be full. Sir Luther lamented the crowd, suggesting they would have to find another place, which led Lucas to apologize to the knight for bringing them all that way, only to miss out on the delectable sausages. Hearing this, the pub owner began to shake with sudden intensity and ordered his customers to stop eating and get out immediately. He looked quite ominous as he declared the pub closed for the day, even scattering tables and shouting down any protests by asserting his authority as the owner. After kicking everyone out and flipping the sign to closed, he turned to Lucas's team and insisted the place was now empty. He announced he would use his great skills for the first time in a while and told them to go wash up while he prepared the food. Later that night, the moon shone brightly into a small room where Sonia was taking a hot bath. She found the quiet cleaning process eerily pleasant, but downstairs, a feast had already been laid out. Lucas was in his usual fashion, stuffing his mouth with food. When Sonia walked down the staircase, Lucas noted her arrival and mentioned he had already started without her. Sonia appeared to be blushing slightly as she called his name, prompting Lucas to ask if she was sick since her face was red. She explained that she finally felt human again now that she was clean, but as she reached for a chair, she slipped and fell. Lucas instantly caught her before she hit the ground, but the sudden movement caused the clothes covering her back to fly open. Lucas noticed a multitude of scratch marks on her hands and arms from sparring and training. She pulled her hand away and tried to cover herself, but Lucas surprised her by saying that the scars looked cool. He smiled and remarked that those marks were the traces of her effort, which made her blush even more intensely. Isabella mentioned hearing that they were headed for Castcow and asked for their final destination. Sonia revealed they were going to the Jun house, causing Lucas to recall his friend from the academy, Peruan Jun. He remembered hearing that the Aquareed house was an impressive household that birthed skilled knights, and he suddenly put the pieces together. He shouted out that she must be the fiancée, a realization shared by Isabella. Sonia grew uncomfortable as Sir Luther asked if they were acquaintances of Lord Peruan. Isabella explained that Frey and Lord Peruan were fellow trainees and friends from the same academy. Lucas looked at Sonia, confirming she was indeed Peruan's fiancée, before muttering to himself that Peruan was a lucky bastard. The scene then faded into the late hours of the night. The following day they were prepared to depart, and Isabella mentioned to Sonia that she hoped the remainder of her journey would be peaceful. Sonia expressed a sincere request for them to visit the Jun house once their business was concluded, a proposal Lucas accepted with a simple nod. This caused Sonia to smile brightly, stating that she would be waiting for them. Later that same day, the scene shifted to the forest where Lucas and Isabella were walking through the dense brush. Isabella felt a wave of frustration, privately reflecting on how dense Lucas could be regarding Sonia's obvious interest. Lucas noticed her expression and asked why she was making such a face. He then pointed forward, announcing that they had finally arrived at their destination. Before them stood a massive, majestic peak that Lucas identified as the entrance to Schweitzer's dungeon. Isabella gazed at the sight, noting that it was truly worthy of being called the Drake Mountain, as she spotted drakes, the monsters at the very top of the food chain, circling the heights. She asked if they would have to fight those creatures, resulting in Lucas remarking on how nice it would be if that were their only concern. He pointed to the ground, revealing a massive footprint that dwarfed standard measurements, and mentioned that the Drake King was likely dozens of times larger than the ones they saw in the sky. This revelation caused Isabella's legs to give way, leading her to fall to the ground, as she claimed it was impossible to have a drake of that size. Lucas told her to get her thoughts together, reminding her that they were in the Hispania Mountains, a living hell where anything could happen. Suddenly, he gathered his mana around her, causing her to ask what he was doing, just before he blasted her away from her current position. Instantly, a huge beast struck the very spot where she had been standing, sending both Lucas and Isabella flying back. They landed and took their fighting stances, with Isabella initially wondering if Lucas had gone crazy. However, upon looking up, she saw the beast and realized that he had actually saved her life, but privately felt that he should have simply told her to move instead of blasting her. Lucas observed the ogre, noting its bloodshot red skin and 3 eyes, which led him to conclude it was a mutant. The mutant ogre turned toward Isabella and let out a deafening roar before dashing in her direction. Isabella immediately used her fire magic, blasting a spell toward the creature that struck it with full force. Lucas was surprised by the display, realizing she had become much stronger than he expected, yet the attack proved insufficient. As the dust settled, the mutant roared again, the fire seemingly dissipating from its body without leaving a mark. Isabella grew distressed, noting that her attacks were not effective. Lucas looked at her, sensing that she wasn't yet aware of how to measure the creature's built-in strength. He walked toward her and explained that the ogre's skin had gained a high resistance to fire magic when it evolved, likely due to the influence of the local drakes. Isabella asked how they were supposed to subdue it then, leading Lucas to suggest that if fire failed, they should use ice. Lucas then instantly began to create several ice spears from thin air, preparing to launch an attack against the mutant in front of them. The surrounding air grew incredibly chilly as the ice spears manifested. Isabella found herself shivering from the sudden frost, yet she could not look away from the magic being woven. The sight led her to think to herself that Frey truly reminded her of the great mage Lucas, a comparison that grew stronger as the youth prepared his strike. Lucas then fired the ice toward the mutant, striking the creature in 2 distinct positions with a sharp impact. While they both looked on with optimism that the attack had succeeded, the mutant caught them by surprise by striking back from the corner, forcing them to fly through the air as they scrambled to dodge. Although the spears had penetrated the skin, the mutant's hide was far too tough for it to feel any real impact. Even those powerful ice spears failed to pierce the creature completely, resulting in a frantic dash as the mutant sprang toward them in pursuit. Lucas admitted that the beast was surprisingly tough, while Isabella questioned how he could remain so easygoing in such a life-threatening situation. Isabella thrusted fire magic toward the mutant's face in a desperate attempt to slow it down, but the flames did nothing to harm the creature. However, the smoke and heat caused the mutant to lose track of their exact positions, leading Lucas and Isabella to hide within the dense forest. While the beast searched for them, Lucas explained that the creature had not only undergone an attribute evolution, but also possessed bones and skin reinforced like steel. Isabella screamed, suggesting they should simply burn it down with fire magic despite its high resistance. She even proposed using an earthquake spell, like the one he used previously, to bury it alive. Lucas reacted with disbelief, asking how she could be such a musclehead, and if she were trying to gather every drake in the mountains by using such a noisy, large-scale spell. He noted that the creature was already making enough noise by destroying the forest in its search for them. He then told her that there was a special well-digging technique for situations like this. Lucas called out to the mutant to draw its attention, manifesting more ice spears as he told Isabella to chill out and not be so angry. Isabella questioned why he was using those ineffective ice spears again, but Lucas explained that one should only dig a single well to succeed. He aligned the spears one by one in a straight line in front of the mutant. As the creature roared and dashed toward them, Lucas told it to stop shouting because they needed to be discreet. He then fired the first ice spear into the center of the mutant's head, but the beast continued its charge. Isabella screamed that it wasn't working, but Lucas paid her no mind, remaining quiet and concentrated. He fired the second spear, then the third, fourth, and fifth in rapid succession. As each spear struck the same point, the mutant was slowly pushed back by the cumulative force. The 6th and 7th spears followed, and upon the impact of the 7th, the mutant stopped running, unable to move any further. There remained one last spear, which Lucas thrusted toward the target with precision. This final blow acted as the catalyst, driving all the previous spears deep through the mutant's head. The mutant instantly fell to the ground and passed out. Lucas blew on his finger as if cooling a hot gun, remarking that it was always best to just dig a single well. While he took a moment to enjoy the fresh air, the victory was short-lived. A series of roars echoed from behind them as the local drakes took notice of the commotion. Lucas complained that the shitty ogre had managed to gather all the drakes after all. He looked up at the incoming drakes, noting that this journey provided absolutely no time to rest. Heavy fire began to descend from the skies as a drake launched a fierce attack, forcing Lucas and Isabella to seek cover. Lucas quickly manifested a shield to block the descending flames, but the protection proved insufficient against the creature's persistence, resulting in a desperate run into the depths of the forest. Isabella attempted to fight back by firing ice arrows, yet the drake's skin was far too tough for such magic to leave a mark. As the monster prepared to unleash another torrent of fire directly at her, Lucas moved with practiced speed. He appeared behind the beast and thrusted an ice spear through it in an instant, causing the life to seep from the drake's eyes as it crashed heavily to the ground. Their momentary relief was cut short by a much louder, more terrifying roar that echoed through the trees, causing a wave of fear to wash over them. They turned to see the massive form of the Drake King approaching. Isabella nearly screamed in terror, but Lucas quickly grabbed her and muffled the sound, whispering for her to keep quiet. He noted that the Drake King was not an opponent they could defeat at their current level, and suggested they wait silently for it to pass. The Drake King roared violently while searching for the interlopers, its massive legs passing directly in front of their hiding spot. Isabella struggled to compose herself as the earth shook with every step, but the creature eventually walked past them as though they were invisible and exited the forest. Once the danger had faded, Isabella began to cough, realizing they had narrowly escaped notice. The scene shifted to a quieter space where Lucas sat meditating while Isabella used her magic to heal his remaining injuries. Upon finishing, she announced that the treatment was complete. Lucas held a butterfly in his hand, reminiscing on the past 2 weeks they had spent fighting monsters in the mountain range. He felt that his mind was now fully in sync with his body, which made the arduous journey worth the effort. Yet he acknowledged that his most important task still lay ahead. He released the butterfly and told Isabella it was time to move toward their true destination, Schweitzer's dungeon at the mountain's peak. They flew swiftly toward the summit, and as they approached a beautiful lake, Lucas warned Isabella not to deactivate her barrier. He remarked that, given the owner's personality, he wouldn't be surprised if Schweitzer kept monsters hidden in the water. Isabella expressed surprise, asking how he could possibly know the dungeon was located there. Lucas exhaled, explaining that he remembered descriptions of a mountain piercing the clouds with a beautiful lake and a small island at its peak. Isabella remained confused, asking Lucas who he truly was, but he paid her no mind as they finally descended toward the entrance. Isabella was stunned by the magnificent island before them, while Lucas smiled and referred to Schweitzer as a sneaky lad. He noted that buried beneath the humble-looking island was a dungeon many times larger than the landmass itself. He compared the setup to Schweitzer's own nature, appearing humble on the surface while being secretly extravagant. These words left Isabella feeling a bit distraught, though she remained silent as they began to explore. They soon reached a massive tree and discovered an entrance nestled at its base. Isabella marveled at the size of the tree, while Lucas noted it was the obvious entrance, and even complimented the inclusion of stairs. As they began their descent, the path was filled with light to ensure visitors would not be afraid. Walking down the stairs, Isabella felt a wave of shyness and tried to call out to Lucas but found herself unable to do so. She tried to dismiss her own recurring thoughts that Frey might actually be Lucas, telling herself not to bother with such useless ideas. They continued wandering deeper into the quiet, illuminated depths of the dungeon. As they ventured into the dungeon, they arrived at a massive door that loomed before them, glowing with a pulsing blue energy. Lucas reached out to touch the surface, leading Isabella to ask how they were supposed to open such a formidable barrier. Lucas explained that the door was protected by a spell Schweitzer Wilsman had concocted himself, noting that any attempt to open it by force would result in them being obliterated. He then moved toward a crystal ball positioned nearby and placed his hand upon it, causing the artifact to release a massive amount of aura. A thick puff of gas suddenly billowed from the crystal, resulting in Isabella screaming and asking why smoke was filling the space. The vapor quickly gathered and coalesced, forming the shape of a very small boy. The figure began to speak, performing a strange mic check to see if he could be heard, which struck Isabella as incredibly odd, but her attention soon shifted to Lucas, who appeared visibly shocked. All of his focus was pinned on the boy, who welcomed them to his dungeon while remarking that he did not know what misled magicians were pursuing in such a place. Lucas extended his hand toward the boy, but his fingers simply passed through the image, leading Isabella to realize it was merely a welcome message recorded using mana. Lucas noted that the boy was as noisy as usual, his body shaking as he smiled through the tears building in his eyes. He jokingly asked the image how many years it had cheated on its appearance for the recording, pointing out that the boy was supposed to be a senior. Lucas mentioned that it was nice to see him again, addressing him as Schweitzer Wilsman. Isabella was shocked by the revelation of the boy's identity, but the recording continued, asking what had brought them to this place and requesting to be enlightened. Isabella noted that they could not actually converse with the image, and although Lucas called out to his old friend, the recording merely stated that they could try to tell him their reasons, but it would not matter since the message was automatic. This caused a brief sense of discouragement, but the image of Schweitzer promised that they would obtain whatever they desired, because they were within his dungeon. Lucas asked the image how he had died, but Schweitzer, unable to hear the question, moved on to the next phase of the recording. He explained that he could not allow them inside without a little test, requiring the correct answer to a specific question to enter. He warned that even a single mistake could result in them being unable to escape the place for eternity. Deep in thought, Lucas felt as though he had returned to the past, listening to a voice and attitude that remained unchanged from the days they laughed together. It pained him that his voice could not reach his friend, making him feel as though he were the only one left alive. He folded his hand tightly, correcting his own thoughts by acknowledging that while those he loved had returned to dust, the enemies who had caused their downfall were still ruling the world as if nothing had happened. He resolved himself to face the demigods, turning his attention back to the boy who decided it was uncool to drag the conversation out any longer. Schweitzer then asked the pivotal question, what did he hate the most? Lucas provided the answer, resulting in the boy announcing it was correct. As the massive door finally swung open, the image of Schweitzer poofed away, and Lucas resolved himself to walk forward into the darkness. Isabella followed in shock, struggling to find the courage to ask who he truly was. They paused for a moment before Lucas told her not to stand there dumbfounded, reminding her that Schweitzer's personality ensured this was no ordinary warehouse. He warned that traps were likely waiting, and that she would be dead in no time if she stood still. He challenged her to stop overthinking and focus on becoming stronger, urging her to follow him. Isabella agreed calmly as they stepped further into the dungeon. After walking for a while, they arrived at yet another door, which featured a second crystal set beside it. Lucas reached out to touch the artifact, causing smoke to billow out and gather into the form of a young man, whom Lucas immediately identified as a slightly older version of Schweitzer Wilsman. It became apparent that the mage's age increased with every door they passed, leading the image to announce that it was time for the second question. Before posing it, Schweitzer mentioned that he had forgotten to explain that while better items were hidden deeper inside, visitors were permitted to take only a single item. He warned that if this rule were broken, their cute little golem friend would become quite angry, and a single mistake would mean their end. The recording then shifted focus, as Schweitzer mentioned the name Iris Fistfounder, and described her as an incredibly annoying woman. He noted his inability to understand the thought process of witches, remarking that while they were all struggling to save the world, she was falling head over heels for a man who would not care if the world ended. Lucas felt a surge of surprise at these words. Lucas fell into a deep thought, remembering the Black Witch as a woman with ebony hair. He reflected that the title suited her perfectly, and that no man could truly resist her charm, even privately admitting he had never seen a woman quite as alluring as her. But the image of Schweitzer continued, stating that while Iris had her faults, Lucas was even worse. He questioned how a man could not notice the advances Iris made, wondering how a supposedly great mage could be so dense when a woman was crazy for him. Isabella silently noted to herself that the youth before her was exactly like the great mage Lucas in that specific aspect, which clearly annoyed the protagonist. Schweitzer's image doubled down, betting that even a golem was not as dense as Lucas. This entire conversation left Lucas feeling very irritated, and he silently called Schweitzer a bastard in his mind. The recording then explained that Iris held a contract with 3 powerful devils, one of whom held different weapons in each of his 6 arms. Before the image could finish, Lucas correctly identified the being as Asura. Schweitzer confirmed the answer, and as his form disappeared, Lucas walked past swiftly. They entered a space filled with sparkling jewelry and fine artifacts, but they remained unswayed by the allure and moved to the next stage. Upon reaching the next door, an even older version of Schweitzer appeared. Lucas realized that the dungeon served as a living diary of Schweitzer's life, leading him to wonder what his friend had been thinking when he created such a place, and to whom he was trying to convey these messages. The subsequent questions were answered correctly in rapid succession, as they progressed toward what seemed to be the final stage. Isabella remarked that it was incredible that they had reached the 15th room while answering every bizarre question steadily. Lucas admitted it was odd that the subjects were not related to magecraft at all, leading him to wonder about the mage's true intentions. Isabella privately thought that the youth was even more bizarre for knowing all the answers so easily. Finally, they arrived at the entrance to the last room, and encountered an elderly form of Schweitzer. This version caused Lucas to be deeply moved as the image called out the name of Lucas Traumen, hailing him as the great mage who was the strongest at age 40 and the Grand Master of humanity. Schweitzer stated that it was his life's greatest pride to consider such a man a dear friend. Lucas responded with a shaking voice, confirming that Schweitzer was also his best friend, his body trembling as tears built in his eyes. Isabella was gripped by confusion, wondering what the youth had just said as she watched his emotional reaction. The image of Schweitzer then posed the last question, asking for his own real name. Lucas smiled, realizing that the weird questions were designed so that he alone could answer them. He looked forward and stated that the name was Schweitzer Wilsman. Isabella was surprised, believing this to be untrue, but the image smiled and told them to head inside, stating that everything in the room had been prepared for him. Before Lucas could respond, the recording told him to take care of everything and addressed him once more as Lucas. The protagonist stretched out his hand as the image of his old friend puffed into dust, leaving his body shaking with profound sadness. Behind him, Isabella remained in a state of shock, finding it incredibly strange that the great sage had called the boy Frey by the name Lucas, leaving her unable to comprehend the truth of what was happening. Upon entering the final room, the pair discovered a space that felt unexpectedly cozy and livable compared to the previous chambers. Lucas scanned the area and suddenly announced that he had found what he was looking for. Isabella asked what he had discovered, leading him to pull out a small bottle and identify its contents as Frozen River. Isabella was visibly shocked by the name, questioning if it was truly the legendary solution created in the Wailing Cave, where a single drop formed every 1,000 years. She noted that such a miraculous elixir could easily expand a person's magic channels and increase their inner mana, instantly raising an ordinary human to a 4-star stage with just one drop. Lucas remarked that she was as knowledgeable as ever, which caused Isabella to dash toward him in disbelief, as she had previously heard that the elixir was merely a myth. Lucas asked her to calm down, explaining that he absolutely required the substance if he intended to reach the 7-star stage. Isabella looked around the room and asked if that was the sole reason he had come there. Before pulling out an earring and inquiring of its nature, Lucas noticed the item and described the design as pitiful, a sentiment Isabella shared as she held it. Lucas muttered about that old rat leaving such things in the room, which confused Isabella until he explained that those were actually Typhon earrings he had made himself. Isabella was stunned, asking how things he made could possibly be inside the final room of Schweitzer's dungeon. Lucas revealed that those earrings were items he had crafted 4,000 years ago, calling Schweitzer a sneaky bastard for keeping them. He explained that he had originally made them when he had nothing else to do and gave them to Schweitzer because the man liked them for some reason, resulting in his friend storing them safely for all this time. Isabella tried to comport herself despite the weight of these words, and asked him to elaborate on what he meant. A heavy silence fell between them for a second before Lucas stated plainly that he was Lucas Traumen. This revelation acted as a massive shock to Isabella, who could only glare at him in silence. Lucas continued by explaining that 4,000 years ago he and Schweitzer had rebelled against the demigod lord, leading to his imprisonment in the darkness of the abyss for 4 millennia. He described how a voice eventually pierced that darkness and reached him, the voice of Frey Blake. Lucas admitted he did not know how the boy had called out to him or how their minds had synchronized, but he managed to answer in that moment, resulting in Frey giving him his body. Surprisingly, Isabella took the news calmly, asking if that was truly the case. Lucas expressed his own surprise at her reaction, admitting he didn't think she would actually believe him. Isabella noted that while it was an inconceivable story, there were many instances where the truth of it had been apparent, and this far-fetched excuse finally explained everything. She then bent over, bowing deeply to him and presenting her heartfelt greetings to Lord Lucas. Lucas picked the Typhon earrings from her hands and told her to just call him Frey as usual. He mentioned that maintaining his cover would help him succeed in his goal, urging her to read the mood and act as she always had because her formal greeting gave him goosebumps. She eventually picked up another item and asked if he had also made the scent-enhancing bracelet in her hand. Lucas clarified that the item was something Schweitzer had made, the great sage's staff, which he used to handle as if it were a part of himself. When Isabella pointed out that it looked like a bracelet, Lucas took the artifact from her, warning that using it incorrectly could suck her mana dry and kill her. Lucas placed the bracelet on his hand and put the Typhon earrings on his ears, beginning the process of synchronizing them with his own mana. This caused Isabella to be astonished by the massive increase in his mana, leading her to remark on the power. Lucas noted that while it wasn't usually his style to use magic tools, he would make an exception for a friend's keepsake. Isabella then found another object and asked if it was a golem core. Lucas took the core from her, noting that considering the mana inside, it was definitely not something to drink from. He placed the core in his bag and instructed her to pack up everything else, noting that all that remained was Schweitzer's desk. They walked forward and saw a candle on the desk that burned for eternity using mana. Lucas remarked that his friend always preferred crafting useless things like that. Lucas then opened the book resting on the desk, and they looked inside to see the opening words. Lucas vanished. Lucas began to read the contents of the diary, absorbing the desperate words written by his old friend. The text stated that Schweitzer was certain Lord was the culprit, as no one else could make Lucas disappear without leaving a single trace. The writing questioned what should be done, noting that this was not as simple as a 9-star magician vanishing, but rather the loss of the leader who had united them all. Schweitzer had written that the last hope of humanity had vanished with him. Lucas realized that Schweitzer had recorded everything that followed his disappearance, including the clash between the magic warrior king Kasajin and the Blade Knight Lucid, as well as the sudden disappearance of Iris Fistfounder. The diary detailed how the Demigods' influence had already rooted itself deeply within the continent, leaving Schweitzer alone and unable to trust his fellow humans. Despite their outward admiration, their hearts were filled with malice as they plotted his death. Lucas read the detailed accounts of the terrible daily battles his friend fought in solitude. Schweitzer had written that Lucas was an irreplaceable leader, and though he tried to bear that burden in his stead, every passing second only highlighted his own lack of skill and the painful emptiness Lucas had left behind. As they continued reading, they both began to tear up, reaching a part where Schweitzer repeatedly apologized to Lucas for failing him. Lucas placed his hand on the book and called his friend a moron, asking why he had gone so far on his own. He admitted to himself that he only truly understood the weight of being left alone after experiencing his current life. He told the memory of Schweitzer that he would inherit the loneliness and the will left behind, promising that he would definitely strike their enemies right in the face. Isabella broke the brief, heavy silence by pointing out that there was another page left. This page was an address to whoever found the diary, instructing them to complete Anastasia, as all of Schweitzer's records were contained within his greatest masterpiece. Isabella asked Lucas what he thought Anastasia could be, prompting him to pull the core from his bag and look at it once more. He realized that this gem must be the golem's core, and that Schweitzer must have reached the pinnacle of his craft to call it his masterpiece. As they climbed the stairs to exit the dungeon, Lucas mused about the nature of Anastasia, leading Isabella to ask if he could complete the golem using that core. Lucas was struck by those words, which caused his thoughts to drift back to a memory of the past. He recalled showing Schweitzer the very first golem he had ever created, which looked like total crap. Schweitzer had made fun of him, laughing, and asking if he actually called that thing a golem. Lucas had defensively claimed it was an advanced guard design with a cubist approach. But Schweitzer only laughed harder, telling him he should never make golems and should just ask for help next time. Schweitzer had joked that he could make something better using only his tongue, which resulted in Lucas asking how long it had been since he was last hit with a fireball, before actually blasting him across the space. Shaking off the memory, Lucas told Isabella that if they completed the golem, they would finally learn the unrecorded history. When she asked what that meant, he explained it covered everything that happened while he was locked in the abyss. As they neared the exit, Lucas suddenly felt a strange, heavy energy. He told Isabella that as soon as they were outside, she needed to head back to the village immediately. Upon stepping out, they saw drakes flying everywhere, and directly in front of them, the Drake King was laying in wait. They began to shrivel under the pressure of the beast's presence. Lucas glared at the massive creature and asked if it had been waiting for him, to which the Drake King returned an intense predatory glare. The drake sat atop the mountain hill directly in front of Lucas, who demanded to know if the creature had been waiting for him. He asserted that he already recognized the monster as an intelligent being, a statement that clearly surprised the beast. The drake laughed, remarking that Lucas was an interesting one for fearlessly stepping into the mighty Torkunda's territory. Lucas then questioned why the drake had not attacked them back in the forest, despite noticing their presence. As he spoke, Isabella noticed that his voice was shaking, leading her to realize she had never seen him in such a nervous state before. The drake laughed again, explaining that he had been waiting for them to exit the dungeon, because those who emerged from that place always carried something valuable. This revelation caused Lucas to think of the bottle he had retrieved, and he told the Drake that he finally understood how the monster had grown so large. He accused the beast of using his friend's treasured dungeon as a trap to hunt humans just to fill an insignificant stomach. He told the Drake that he was in need of a beating, which visibly angered the creature. However, as the Drake looked into Lucas's eyes, the gaze caused him to remember Iris Fistfounder, who had beaten him down earlier in his life, threatening to kill him if he persisted. The Drake told Lucas that he did not like those eyes at all. Lucas urgently told Isabella to run, but the Drake began to ready a fireball, resulting in Lucas screaming that he was honestly not confident in this battle and that she needed to leave immediately. Isabella countered that his lack of confidence was exactly why she should stay, but the Drake screamed that people like them tasted the best before promising to eat them. As the monster spat out a massive fireball, Lucas utilized the bracelet from the dungeon to manifest a magnificent magic staff. He swung it instantly, causing a massive boulder wave of earth to rise and strike the Drake directly in the face, which caught the creature off guard. Lucas then harshly asked Isabella if she understood that she would only be a hindrance, and called her a leech. This sharp rebuke finally caused her to gather herself, and she inhaled deeply before dashing off, promising to return as fast as possible. Now alone, Lucas took a firm stance in front of the Drake, who called him a wretched bastard before spitting a heavy amount of fire. Lucas flew upward to avoid the flames, but the Drake began a relentless chase. The monster stayed very close, firing multiple fireballs in quick succession as Lucas maneuvered through the air to stay ahead of the onslaught, and Lucas soon realized that several smaller Drakes were blocking his path ahead. Annoyed by the interference, he used the energy from the necklace and the staff to conjure ice spears merged with a powerful windstorm. This combined attack struck the smaller Drakes, tearing them into pieces in an instant. While the path was cleared, Lucas thought to himself that killing those small fry would not change the outcome, as he needed to deal with the big guy to end the fight. He moved into a specific position and began preparing a trap, calculating that he needed 3 seconds to trigger an explosion. By gauging the Drake's speed and flight direction, he aimed to catch the beast in the blast. And just before the Drake could reach him, a massive explosion erupted from underneath, rocking the creature and sending it flying unexpectedly. The explosion from Lucas's trap caused the Drake King to reel, but the protagonist quickly realized the effort was insufficient as the beast screamed with a mocking laughter. Torkunda admitted the move was impressive, noting that Lucas had correctly calculated its speed to plant the blast, but the monster sneered that such skills were wasted when the power behind them was only enough to barely tickle its hide. The Drake King swung its massive wings, resulting in a gale that pushed Lucas back through the air. Facing Torkunda while a swarm of lesser Drakes closed in from behind, Lucas acknowledged that he was in significant trouble, as the sheer size of the opponent was overwhelming. He desperately searched for a solution, wondering if there was anything left in his arsenal, or if he would be forced to drink the frozen river elixir immediately. He recalled a previous conversation where Isabella had asked why he wasn't drinking the miraculous liquid right then. He had explained to her that the elixir was far more than a simple energizing toxin, noting that even he would need at least a week to properly control its vast energy. Lucas knew he had to keep people alive and take care of the threat, yet he remained uncertain if his current state would allow for anything but a quick death. As Torkunda loomed over him with its mouth open, preparing to pour out a torrent of lethal fire, Lucas felt a rare flicker of genuine fear. Suddenly, a strange burst of firepower struck the Drake King from the side, catching it completely by surprise. Lucas looked on in shock, realizing the Phoenix from their earlier encounter had returned to fight by his side. The spirit bird grabbed 2 of the lesser Drakes by their necks and incinerated them instantly, causing their charred remains to fall to the ground. Lucas expressed his joy, noting that the Phoenix seemed to be bursting with health. The Drake King, however, was merely annoyed, screaming at the little chick not to interfere in its business. Torkunda moved forward in a terrifying blur, prompting Lucas to scream for the Phoenix to run away, as the Drake King was not an opponent it could face. The Phoenix ignored the warning, forcing more energy around its body and dashing toward the Drake King to clash head-on. Lucas tried to call out again, explaining that Torkunda possessed a high resistance against fire magic, making the beast a natural enemy to a fire spirit. He pleaded with the Phoenix to listen, but as he looked into its eyes, he saw a resolve so fierce it silenced him. He realized that the Phoenix had known about the attribute disadvantage from the very beginning, but had come to save him anyway. This understanding led him to conclude that the bird was trying to buy him time, which caused a wave of shame to wash over him. He found it pathetic that Lucas Traumen was being told to run away. He questioned if his current weakness was due to a feeble physical body, or if his senses had dulled because magic had degraded over 4,000 years. Ultimately, he admitted that it was his own resolve and determination that had been lacking. Turning away with a heavy heart, he apologized to the Phoenix and promised that he owed it a great debt. He spotted a nearby cave and dashed inside, thanking the spirit for making him realize that death is an everyday occurrence that must be faced with total commitment. He pulled out the bottle of frozen river and drank the elixir, knowing he needed the Phoenix to hold on just a little longer. As the liquid hit his throat, a strange shock coursed through his body, resulting in a violent surge of energy that caused the wind to scatter everything in the space. Sitting on the cold ground, Lucas braced himself as the power of the elixir began to reshape his very existence, releasing a terrifying amount of energy that caused the space around him to freeze up instantly. He struck his hand against the cold ground, struggling to bear the crushing weight of the elixir, but the memory of the Phoenix fighting outside forced him to endure. The scene shifted back to the mountainside, where the Phoenix was clashing with the Drake King. Torkunda laughed at the spirit bird, noting that it looked familiar, and identifying it as the divine beast that had escaped his grasp some time ago. The monster remarked that it was a very good day, as while the human who ran away was good prey, the Phoenix's tenacious life energy would fill his stomach much more. The Phoenix glared at the Drake, remembering their earlier encounter when the beast had nearly subdued it. Back then, Torkunda had told the bird to give up and become a wonderful meal, but the Phoenix had managed to create a smokescreen using a fireball to dash away. This had annoyed the Drake King, who had called the bird a slimy bastard but decided there was no need to rush since they would surely cross paths again as long as it stayed within the Hispania Mountains. That escape was what had led the Phoenix to the waterfall where it first met Lucas. The protagonist had healed the spirit, forming a deep connection that the Phoenix now recalled vividly. It remembered the warm hands of the mage on its back and how he had nurtured it back to health, calling it a friend. These memories caused the Phoenix to scream with renewed vigor, dashing toward the Drake King with the realization that it had to protect the one who had healed and protected it. Torkunda grew increasingly annoyed by the Phoenix's tenacity, calling it an annoying little vermin, before striking it hard with his tail. The Phoenix coughed and was forced backward. Meanwhile, inside the cave, Lucas was in agony, swearing under his breath as he realized the burden of the frozen river was far more enormous and difficult than he had anticipated. He apologized to Schweitzer in his mind, fearing he was wasting his second chance at life as his body fell limp to the ground. He blamed his own pride and overconfidence for his current state, thinking of everyone he was letting down. Suddenly, a strange warmth began to spread through him, and he wondered why he was slowly gaining energy. He felt a warm aura as Isabella's hands reached out to him, warming his body as she told him to stay still because he didn't have enough energy yet. Lucas turned to find Isabella there. Lucas asked why she had returned, to which she reminded him that he had mentioned needing food and nutrition to absorb the frozen river properly. When he asked if she had gone to the village, she referenced his earlier words about being left alone. She explained that while she didn't fully understand what he was trying to accomplish in this world, she trusted him above anyone else. She asked him never to say he was alone again, noting that he could barely even look after himself at the moment. Lucas felt a wave of gratitude and thanked her. He finally understood what he had been lacking. It wasn't resolve or courage, but rather trust in those who are currently alive. As Isabella continued to use her ability to warm and support his body, the essence of the elixir began to work even harder inside him, finally starting to synchronize with his magic channels. The duel between the Drake King and the Phoenix continued with ferocity until the ground suddenly began to rumble, drawing their attention toward the cave entrance, where an ominous energy had started to pour out. But the Phoenix used this distraction to dash forward and strike the Drake in the eyes. This caused the beast to scream in agony as it lost one of its eyes, resulting in a fit of rage where it beat the Phoenix by the back and threw it violently to the ground. The Drake King stood over the fallen spirit, screaming about how it dared to injure his eyes, and noting that while the bird seemed tenacious, it would not rise again. He prepared to crush the Phoenix with his claw, but a blinding light suddenly cut through the space, shocking the Drake as the sheer force of the energy pushed him away and sent him flying upward. This light was so powerful that it sliced through the mountain beside them, leading Torkunda to realize that he would have been cut in half had he stayed in that spot. He questioned what could possibly be happening inside that cave, just as more blinding light began to tear through the entire area. The lesser drakes nearby were not spared from this surge, The energy froze them instantly, causing them to fall to the ground defeated. For the first time in 1,000 years of life, the Drake King felt a genuine emotion, a dreading fear. His instincts screamed at him to run away, insisting that this was a power he could not handle. Despite his pride, he took to the sky to escape, telling himself that it was impossible for the great Torkunda to be afraid of a measly human. He reasoned that he simply needed to stay away until his eyes recovered, but his retreat was cut short when Lucas appeared in front of him with blinding speed. The Drake instantly stopped, unable to believe that a mere human had managed to catch up to him so easily. Lucas manifested multiple ice spears and struck the beast, the force of the ice pushing the massive creature back. Torkunda screamed and shattered the spears, but when he looked for his opponent, Lucas had already vanished from his sight. Suddenly, Lucas's voice came from behind him, noting that the Drake's arrogance had weakened him and questioning how a 1,000-year-old monster could rely so heavily on its eyes alone. The Drake grew increasingly frustrated, thinking of the boy as a bastard who kept moving specifically into his blind spots. Lucas created yet another ice spear and struck the eye that had already been damaged, resulting in a scream of pain from the monster. The Drake tried to retaliate by swinging its tail at Lucas, sending his body flying straight to the rock behind him in a shattering speed. To the beast's absolute surprise, Lucas used his ice magic to freeze the Drake's tail mid-swing. Lucas stood upon the ground amidst the rubble, appearing completely unharmed as he looked up at his foe. The sight caused the Drake to wonder if the being before him was even a human at all, as his fear grew deeper with every passing second. Torkunda, hovering above him, questioned what Lucas had become to possess such an overwhelming aura, while Isabella watched the scene unfold with a growing sense of dread. She looked at the boy and worried that he must be on the very verge of collapsing, silently urging him not to drag out the battle for too long. In response to the threat, Lucas prepared a gigantic ice spear that loomed in front of the Drake, radiating a chilling intensity. Torkunda, seeing the scale of the construct, assumed it was his opponent's greatest attack, and decided to finalize the duel right then and there. The Drake King noted that while he didn't know how the human had become so much stronger, his fire breath had already defeated a phoenix, so a mere magician of the ice attribute stood no chance against him. Torkunda unleashed his fire, declaring that the human was dead meat, while Lucas dropped the massive ice spear at the same moment. This resulted in a violent collision between the elements that sent a huge shockwave through the space. Isabella observed the unbelievable scene from a corner, noting that the clash was quickening the entirety of the Hispania Mountains, even as the entire space shook under the pressure. However, the Drake suddenly added more power to his breath, causing the ice to be pushed back toward the earth. Isabella grew frantic, thinking that Lucas was slowly losing ground and despairing. The Drake continued to push his fire with absolute confidence, and while Isabella was shocked by her own helplessness, she suddenly realized that she could no longer see Frey standing where he should have been. Torkunda had no idea that Lucas was missing and laughed, declaring the fight over as he mocked the boy for being a measly bug who could never rival the great Torkunda. Much to Isabella's shock, the Drake's head was suddenly slit in an instant. Lucas appeared behind the beast, having conjured a massive ice scythe that he used to cut the Drake's head clean off, while the monster was distracted by his own breath. The Drake King's head and body fell heavily to the ground, leaving Isabella stunned by the swift conclusion. She moved toward the remains of Torkunda, finding it unbelievable that the youth had actually killed a 1,000-year-old monster, while not even in his perfect form. She wondered just how powerful Lucas Traumen must have been in his prime if he could accomplish this now. Once the battle settled, the exhaustion took its toll, and Lucas fell from the sky, heading straight for the ground. Isabella dashed toward him and caught him before he hit, expressing her concern as she noted his entire body was frozen solid and felt incredibly cold. Lucas looked at her and insisted that she take him to the Phoenix immediately. Isabella called him incredible for defeating the Drake King so easily as she carried him toward the fallen spirit bird, but Lucas corrected her by saying the monster was actually lacking in battle experience. He explained that despite being over 1,000 years old, there was a vast difference between slaughtering humans and fighting a proper duel. He mentioned that fighting powerful opponents required both strength and tactics, revealing that he had made the Drake believe he was committing all his strength to a decisive attack. In reality, he had used 80% of his mana for the ice spear as a distraction, and reserved the remaining 20% to move behind Torkunda with the scythe. Isabella was shocked, finding the use of such an enormous spear as a mere feint to be incredibly insightful. They finally landed where the phoenix lay defeated, and Isabella began to cry, believing the bird had already breathed its last. Lucas placed his hand on the phoenix and told the spirit that it had saved his life, beginning to levitate the bird toward the heart of the dead Drake King. Isabella realized that the flame energy within Torkunda's heart was still active and was being absorbed into the phoenix. Lucas noted that as a phoenix it could definitely revive using all that energy. He observed that with Torkunda dead, the other drakes in the valley would fight for dominance. But he told the phoenix that it should become the ruler of the mountains instead. He explained that he was leaving the phoenix in charge to ensure Schweitzer's dungeon would not be defiled by another monster. He bid the spirit farewell, saying he looked forward to the day they would meet again. Lucas and Isabella arrived at Symphony, where a busy market operated nearby, filling the air with the sounds of trade. Lucas sat on a bench, having already dressed and cleaned himself, which resulted in a much more presentable appearance at that moment. Isabella mentioned to him that she had reserved a ship, as they had previously thought none would be departing that day. Lucas praised her for the nice work as she handed him a cup of water, which he took and drank. When she asked how he felt now, he replied that he was fine, but simply needed to put on some weight. Isabella noted that the equipment they recovered from Torkunda's nest seemed to be having a positive effect, specifically how the powerful fire-attributed Salamandra's cloak made by Schweitzer appeared to be stabilizing the frozen, cold energy in his body. Lucas agreed but questioned if there was truly a need to take every single item from the nest, noting that the spatial storage bag was already almost full. He followed this by explaining that while the items might be useless, he could not let his friend's keepsakes rot in such a place. A brief moment of silence followed before Isabella remarked that the new semester was almost here, leading her to feel as though a few years had passed during such a long vacation. Lucas pointed out that they had only been in Hispaniola for a week. Isabella then asked what he thought about going to Peruan's house, and when Lucas questioned the idea, she explained that it was in the area and they would have to stay there for the day regardless, resulting in their arrival at the entrance of the Jun house. Both Lucas and Isabella were stunned by the sheer size of the estate. The guards asked them to state their business, to which Lucas asked if Peruan was there. The guard was visibly stunned by the informal way he spoke and asked who he was. Lucas initially said he was a friend, causing the guard to ask for his name. Lucas paused for a second, leading the guard to view him as an insolent brat, but then Lucas smiled and stated that his name was Frey Blake. This name caused the guard to remember Peruan's earlier instructions regarding a friend named Frey, the third son of the Blake house, who might visit during the vacation. Peruan had ordered that if he arrived, he should be treated with the utmost respect and courtesy. Hearing the name Frey caused a huge weight of pressure to hit the guard immediately. While he had just looked at Lucas as a little brat, he now wondered if this was the young master's only friend. Just then, it was announced that the young lady had returned, and a carriage parked in front of Lucas and Isabella. The door opened, and Lady Lilia walked out, looking elegantly in front of everyone as she asked what the matter was. The guards informed her that a man claiming to be her brother's friend had come. Lilia looked at Lucas for a second, smiled, and addressed him as Sir Frey, mentioning that she had heard a lot about him from her brother. She then turned to Isabella and acknowledged her as Lady Isabella. When Isabella asked who she was, she introduced herself as Peruan's little sister, Lilia, and invited them to get on the carriage so she could take them to the mansion. They were surprised by the offer, but followed her. Isabella noted that Lilia was a truly gorgeous lady, admitting that even as a woman, Lilia took her breath away. The guard attempted to mention that they had not yet ascertained Lucas's identity, but Lilia simply looked at him, causing the guard to blush and apologize for his discourtesy. As they rode inside, Lucas noted to himself that he still could not see the main building even after passing the gate, leading him to wonder just how large the estate actually was. Lilia stared at Lucas, prompting him to ask what she was looking at so intently and if there was something she wished to say. This caused her to blush as she noted that he was a lot different than how her brother had portrayed him, specifically that his hair was white instead of the ashen gray she had heard of. Lilia requested that he speak freely as a friend of her brother and the Blake house, and Lucas readily agreed to do so. When Lucas asked what was wrong, Isabella tried to caution him because he was being a bit rude. Lilia then mentioned she heard they attended the Westroad Academy and asked how her brother was doing there. Lucas responded that he had no idea because Peruan was 2 years above him, so they did not meet often. Lilia began to think about how he was not much older than her, resulting in her wondering if her brother was truly friends with this man. They finally arrived at the Jun house, where Peruan stood waiting with a look of genuine happiness. He welcomed Lucas, mentioning that he was late and that he had been waiting for his arrival. Holding Lucas gently by the arm, Peruan asked if he had finished dealing with his business, to which Lucas replied that he had done so more or less. Lucas then questioned how his new hair looked, noting that he had tried changing his style a bit. Watching the two, Peruan's sister felt a wave of surprise, as she had never seen her brother smile so happily before. She grudgingly expressed that her brother must not care much about her. But Peruan quickly insisted that he would never ignore his little princess. He then asked her how the party had been. She walked off, telling them to simply have a good time. And though Peruan called out to her, she did not answer. Peruan noted that this was a bad turn of events, remarking that while his sister often got mad, the reason was always a mystery. Lucas countered that, in his opinion, the way Peruan called his sister a princess without any hesitation was an even greater mystery. Peruan then mentioned that he had not expected Lucas's destination to be the mountains of hell, leading Lucas to ask how he knew that since he had not mentioned it before. Peruan reminded him that he had saved his fiancée in those mountains, a comment that surprised Lucas until Isabella clarified that he was referring to Lady Sonia. Lucas noted that it seemed Sonia had arrived home safely. Peruan exhaled and described how Sonia was still training her sword skills relentlessly every day, calling her an incredibly hard worker who well deserved the title of Rainstorm at such a young age. Lucas joked that she was far too good for Peruan, resulting in Peruan calling him an asshole in return. Lucas then asked where they were headed, and Peruan explained that it was a family rule for all guests to greet the family head first. They arrived at the entrance to the dining room, where the table was already set with an abundance of food, and the meal had already begun. Shepherd Jun, the leader of the Jun house, welcomed them and asked how Count Blake was doing. Lucas replied that the Count was doing well, though internally he acknowledged that he was merely borrowing this body and had never actually met the man. While Lucas looked up at the master of the 4th magic tower, considering that one of the Empire's 5 7-star magicians might have information about the Demigods, Shepherd mentioned that because the 6th magic tower was quite far away, he only met the Count once a year and missed their worthwhile time together. Lucas said he understood, but his focus was drawn to the magic tattoo on Shepherd's face, which he recognized as Schweitzer's work. Shepherd expressed his heartfelt gratitude for Lucas helping his son and saving his fiancée, though Lucas insisted he was unworthy of such thanks. Shepherd then asked what business Lucas had in the mountains of hell. Lucas explained that he had some personal matters to attend to, and when pressed he stated that it was a trivial thing, undeserving of the great mage's attention. Shepherd laughed and turned to Peruan, asking how the banquet preparations were progressing. Peruan confirmed everything was on schedule, leading Shepherd to state that many important guests would attend, and that Peruan would personally supervise the event as practice for his future. Peruan's brother sat nearby, looking bored by the conversation, but Shepherd then turned back to Lucas. He addressed him as Frey and mentioned a magic he had been researching personally, expressing a desire to hear a new point of view from a mage of the younger generation. Lucas said he was unsure if his abilities could be of help, but Shepherd insisted there was no need to feel pressured. As the other brothers stood up to leave, Peruan told Frey that he would be waiting in the banquet hall and wished him luck. Lucas told him the same, and then instructed Isabella to go and help Peruan instead of staying with him, leaving the room empty except for Shepherd Jun and Lucas. The atmosphere shifted instantly as Shepherd addressed him as Frey Blake, in a very ominous tone. He told Lucas that he should reveal his true intentions now, causing Lucas to look at him sternly. Shepherd asked him directly what he was scheming, resulting in Lucas feeling deeply confused by the sudden accusation, which caused Shepherd Jun to demand an explanation for why the Traumen rings had come to his estate. This mention of the Traumen rings left Lucas questioning the term internally, leading him to respond that the master of the tower must be misunderstanding something. Shepherd Jun noted that it was quite cunning of the youth to use Peruan, suggesting that he might have learned of the master's presence at home through his son. He continued by accusing the young man of arrogance for openly wearing those earrings in his presence, as if they were nothing. Lucas realized the man was referring to the typhoon earrings he was currently wearing, resulting in him touching the jewelry while wondering if the Traumen rings referred to the club Peruan led at the academy. He informed his host that he did not understand the accusation, explaining that he had obtained the earrings himself within the Hispania Mountains. This led Shepherd Jun to ask if he was not a part of the Traumen rings, to which Lucas replied that while Peruan had invited him to join the club once, he had refused because he disliked being chained down to a group. The response was quite surprising to Shepherd Jun, who stood up in a sudden rage to clarify that he was not speaking of his son's school club, but about something else entirely. He paused, looking intently at Lucas before sitting back down and concluding that the boy must simply be a wanderer. He noted that he had clearly misunderstood the situation and told Lucas that he could let down his guard. Lucas countered that he would do so only if the master did the same first, leading the man to remark on his pride and ask if he knew where he was standing. Lucas simply identified the place as his friend's house, insisting that he had come only to visit Peruan and had not given a single thought to meeting the master of the tower. Shepherd Jun exhaled and admitted that while he did not fully trust the youth yet, he would attempt to change his opinion of him. However, he insisted on knowing more about the boy's background, stating that as long as he wore those earrings, he had to be considered one of them. He then asked Lucas who he thought was the true master of the continent. Lucas listened as Shepherd Jun explained that while the Castkau Empire might be the greatest nation founded by humans, it barely covered 1/10 of the continent's size, noting that if the power of all intelligent creatures were measured by 5 fingers, human power would only account for 3, making it difficult for humanity to claim mastery over the world. The conversation deepened as Shepherd Jun revealed the existence of a true master, a transcendent being controlling everything from the shadows, the demigods. This revelation caused Lucas's attention to perk up immediately. Shepherd Jun described them as semi-divine existences that transcend humanity and act as the true predators of society. He noted that such an idea might sound like a foolish conspiracy theory to a young man. Yet he noticed Lucas was smiling. Lucas thought of how there had once been only 5 of them who put their lives on the line to oppose these beings. He had believed that after 4,000 years, the demigods had fully twisted the laws of the world while the common people remained ignorant, so finding someone who still possessed this mindset pleased him greatly. Shepherd Jun noticed the young man's distraction and asked if something was the matter. Lucas felt a surge of hope, realizing that people were finally noticing the existence of the demigods and that there were fighters in every corner of the world waiting for an opportune moment to strike. Shepherd Jun asked if Lucas had prior knowledge of these beings, resulting in Lucas confirming that he knew a little. When asked how, Lucas calmed himself, realizing that while this man was an ally, he must not reveal his true identity yet. He instead claimed that he had read Schweitzer's notes when he obtained the earrings. Shepherd Jun was taken aback by the mention of Schweitzer's notes, but noticed that Lucas seemed to want more information. He shared that the information his group had about the demigods was scarce, and that their ultimate goals and numbers remained unknown. He noted that while they did not know why these beings acted from the shadows, they were certain that the demigods were powerful enough to wipe every species off the face of the world on a whim. Lucas felt a sense of relief that the master knew the important facts, even though he personally knew that the demigods likely numbered fewer than 100, with each one possessing the power of destruction. Shepherd Jun then began to speak of history, mentioning that 4,000 years ago, there were 5 heroes who stood up against the demigod. The conversation turned to the figures of legend, as Shepherd Jun named the famous heroes Lucas had certainly heard of: the great sage Schweitzer, magic warrior King Kasajin, blade king Lucid, black witch Iris, and the great mage Lucas. He explained that after the great mage vanished, the course of history shifted significantly, resulting in a rift that split the Magic Warrior King and the Blade King apart. He noted that the Black Witch had erased all traces of herself from the records, leaving the Great Sage as the only one to remain and fight until the end, though even he could not face a demigod on his own. As the names of these people became mere history, Lucas considered that Shepherd's words were just as wise as the contents of the diary. This led Lucas to believe he could trust the man's words. Shepherd then identified his organization as a circle that had inherited the will of those heroes. When Lucas questioned the nature of this circle, Shepherd explained that while he generalized it as one, they were actually separated and divided throughout the continent. He admitted that over time, the inherited will had split, leading to a situation where the different factions were constantly keeping each other in check. Lucas found this to be true to human nature, noting that things always become political whenever 3 or more people gather. Shepherd continued by naming the most influential circles: the straw necklaces, the fist founder amulets, and the lucid swords. Lucas realized these groups were using the names of his old companions, prompting him to wonder why Kasajin's name or his own were not among them. Shepherd admitted he knew little of other circles, but mentioned that the situation for the Traumen rings was quite dire. He revealed that their circle master had died, resulting in half of the executives joining other circles. This news annoyed Lucas, who felt a deep irritation at the petty politics involved in such a legacy. When Lucas asked about the successor of the Magic Warrior King, Shepherd explained that Kasajin's title was passed down to only one person at a time, but their current whereabouts remained a complete mystery. Lucas then asked if the circle was related to the Academy Club, leading Shepard to clarify that the club was merely something young students created on a whim. He mentioned that while they occasionally recruited geniuses from the Academy, the students remained ignorant of the true circle's existence. Shepard poured a glass of red wine and noted that it was actually better for their safety if other organizations shared their name, as it kept the true circle better hidden from the demigods' eyes and ears. As Lucas took the offered glass, he realized that their current conversation might already be reaching the ears of a demigod, acknowledging the truth in Shepard's caution. Shepard then explained that he had tested Lucas because he had arrived wearing a relic, the Typhoon Earring. He confessed that he initially thought Lucas was a dedicated member of the Traumen rings who had come to declare war. He then asked Lucas to explain how he had obtained the rings, noting that while rumors placed such relics in the Hispania Mountains, few who challenged those peaks ever returned, and none had ever succeeded in finding anything. Lucas knew that most seekers simply had no idea where the dungeon was, and even those who did would have been stopped by Torkunda at the entrance. He told Shepard that he had been lucky, claiming he ran into an unknown area during a difficult situation and happened upon Schweitzer's dungeon. This caused Shepard to be visibly shocked as he asked if the diary had also been found there. Lucas confirmed this, stating the contents matched what Shepard had told him. This revelation caused Shepard to dash forward and grab Lucas, demanding to know how to get there. Lucas apologized, explaining that since the discovery was accidental, he might not be able to help. Shepard responded by admitting he still couldn't completely erase his suspicions. He asked Lucas to demonstrate the effect of the Typhoon Earring, resulting in Lucas dropping his glass and activating the artifact's energy. As mana released around him, Shepard closed his eyes and noted that the situation wasn't the worst possible outcome. He then confessed that his suspicion wasn't solely due to the Traumen rings. There was a much greater reason. The scene shifted much later to a glittering ball inside the Jun House, where guests in elegant dress chatted and ate. Lucas stood by a wall, resting as he watched the scene, thinking about how complicated things had become. He was glad to find someone who knew of the demigods, but the division and infighting among the circles stressed him. He realized his top priorities were now controlling the frozen river's energy and completing Schweitzer's golem, anesthesia. He also wondered if his synchronization with this body was a complete coincidence. Isabella walked into the room, smiling as she asked what he was thinking about so deeply. She showed off her dress, mentioning Lady Lilia had prepared it for her. Lucas remarked that it must be nice for her to live without any worries, leading her to scold him for the comment. Lucas paid her no mind, his thoughts returning to the chilling revelation Shepard had shared before the ball. When Lucas had asked for the greater reason behind the suspicion, Shepard had looked at him calmly and revealed that during a recent conference, it was reported that someone had gotten in touch with a demigod. When Lucas demanded to know who it was, Shepard identified the person as Frey Blake, Frey's father. The chatter in the ballroom continued as two men spoke nearby, with one remarking that he had heard rumors of Patrick's sword skills being comparable to the knights of the Lua noble kingdom. The other man laughed, noting that any man should be able to achieve such a level if he trained seriously, before turning his attention toward his companion. He addressed him as Gusper and invited him to attend the upcoming banquet at the Diersty house. Gusper accepted, stating it was his honor, while secretly thinking how easy the man was to manipulate. He mused that the man acted high and mighty whenever he received a bit of praise, and it was thanks to such stupidity that his plan to be invited to the Diersty banquet had gone smoothly. Gusper moved to a corner to sip his wine and survey the room, admiring the beautiful ladies gathered there until he suddenly noticed Lucas. Thinking he saw Frey, he decided to approach, just as Sonia walked into the scene looking very elegant. Isabella greeted her warmly, to which Sonia returned the greeting before turning toward the youth. Lucas looked at Sonia and then back at Isabella, remarking that this was what looking good truly meant, a comment that caused Isabella to become annoyed at his perceived meanness. While the two argued, Sonia felt a bit uncomfortable until Lucas asked if she had something to say. She looked away and said no, her blushing face causing both Lucas and Isabella to feel a bit confused. Lucas then asked if she was thirsty and offered her his drink, noting he had only taken a sip, which led Isabella to think about how incredibly dense he was. The conversation was interrupted by Gusper, who expressed his surprise at seeing Frey in such a prestigious place. Isabella asked if he was an acquaintance, and Lucas considered for a moment if this was someone Frey knew. Gusper quickly called him the trash of the Blake house, and Lucas instantly tagged him a bum. not worth his time. Gusper continued his insults, suggesting that Lucas had only managed to attend the banquet through the Blake house's connections, despite being trash. He thought to himself about how hard he had worked as a countryside aristocrat to get an invitation, and felt that Lucas did not belong in a battlefield dedicated to noble information exchange. He even noted that Lucas had entered the Westroad Academy through connections, a place he himself could not enter. Lucas told the man to get lost, stating he would not repeat himself, though Isabella pointed out that he had technically already repeated it. Gusper, shocked by the sudden backbone, asked if he had lost his mind. Sonia asked if he was close with Frey, and Gusper claimed they were very close, privately fuming that the boy was normally incapable of talking back. He wondered who the two gorgeous women with Lucas were, noting they stood out even among the beauties of the party, and assuming Lucas was merely trying to act tough in front of them. Just then, Patrick walked over and asked if something was the matter. Gusper identified him as Sir Patrick, who immediately bent over towards Sonia to introduce himself as the eldest son of the Deersty house. Sonia felt uncomfortable with the attention, while Gusper realized with annoyance that Patrick was using him as a pretense to woo the women he had been aiming for. Sonia introduced herself as Sonia Aquareed, causing Gusper to be shocked by her identity. He assumed she must not know Frey's true nature, since she was from a foreign country, and decided to use the opportunity to humiliate him. He apologized for not recognizing Lord Peruan's fiancée, but Sonia turned to Lucas and insisted the matter was not set in stone. When Lucas asked why she was telling him that, Isabella's annoyance piqued at his continued density. Gusper stated that while he admired Sonia's consideration in greeting guests, Frey Blake was not worthy of her attention. This caused the entire space to grow quiet. Patrick added that he knew Frey's siblings well, mentioning that Michelle and Heinz were both wizards, and that Michelle had recently become a floor master. When Lucas asked why that mattered, Patrick said he could fully understand why Count Isaka had banished him, as he could not believe they shared the same blood. Isabella screamed in defense of Lucas, stating that no one at the banquet could even reach his ankles in terms of skill and demanding an apology. Patrick found the idea of the eldest son of the Deersty house apologizing to Frey to be a joke. He suggested the real apology should come from whoever invited such an unworthy man to the party, leading the surrounding crowd to break into laughter. Suddenly, Peruan walked into the scene and remarked that he seemed to have offended them, a statement that caused everyone to pause in shock at his sudden entrance. And he declared that he was the one who had invited the guest they were disparaging. This revelation caused Gusper to freeze in shock, leading Peruan to remark that it seemed he was not the one they were expecting to see. Peruan directed a cold apology towards Sir Patrick, noting that he had not been aware that he required the permission of the Deersty house to invite a personal friend of his own. Sir Patrick stammered in response, insisting that was not the case. With a mockingly polite tone, Peruan added that, as part of his apology, everyone should praise the most valuable guest among all the invitees at the party. Sir Patrick began to cry, pleading for the Lord to forgive him, but Peruan simply told him there was no need to be so nervous, and encouraged him to enjoy the party. He reminded the men that the house was his, and they were merely guests, but as he grabbed Gusper's shoulder, he whispered that if this were not a party, the man would be dead by now. This threat caused the men to run off like rats, offering desperate apologies for the disturbance as they vanished. Peruan waved them off, leading Lucas to comment that the young master was much more vicious than he had originally thought. Peruan claimed he was merely imitating Lucas, resulting in Lucas defending himself by stating he was actually super gentle and kind. Peruan asked if he had ever used a mirror, to which Lucas joked that his reflection was so bright and shiny he could not even stare at it, which caused the ladies nearby to laugh at their light-hearted exchange. Peruan eventually turned serious, telling Lucas that he was a strange man, and noting that if the world knew the strength he had displayed back at Corteso, no one would ever dare call him the trash of the Count's family again. Lucas responded that a man should not go around showing off in such a way. Peruan then asked what had been discussed with his father, and Lucas explained that Shepherd June had been suspicious of him being part of the Traumen rings. When Peruan asked if Lucas had any intention of joining his club now, Lucas refused immediately. His mind drifted back to the private conversation with Shepherd Jun, specifically the reason the master had cleared his suspicions. It was not just because Lucas could utilize the Typhoon earrings, but because someone else had guaranteed his identity, Haynes Blake. Shepherd had revealed that Lucas's second brother was a member of the Straw Necklaces, and was well aware of what the family had done to him. He mentioned that Haynes was different from Count Isaka and Michelle, and that he had only agreed to the banishment for a different reason. Lucas realized he needed to process this new information carefully. Returning to the present, Lucas informed Perun that he actually did not plan on returning to the academy, words that shocked Isabella as she overheard them. Perun asked if he was serious, and Lucas confirmed there was no reason for him to go back. Isabella looked at Lucas deeply, her mind racing with the realization that, if he did not return to the academy, their paths would soon diverge. When Perun asked about his future plans, Lucas mentioned that the Duke had recommended he join the Third Magic Tower, a suggestion Perun found quite good. Isabella suddenly dropped her cup. She excused herself, saying she would head back first, and left the room. Walking through the hallway after changing her clothes, she thought about how tomorrow would bring their separation, with Lucas heading to the Magic Tower while she returned to school. She knew this day would eventually arrive, but ever since learning that the person inhabiting Frey's body was actually Lucas, she felt lost. She wondered what her goal should be, and what she should learn to truly become a mage. At that moment, she arrived at the door to Perun's room, where Lucas accompanied him inside. Back in the room, Lucas asked Perun if he was also leaving the next day. He thanked his friend for everything, noting that he had had a lot of fun, and that the fame and prestige of the Jun House was impressive. He called Perun a genius of the century, to which Perun admitted that such a description might be true. Perun shared that the first time he had sensed mana was when he was only 5 years old. Lucas was genuinely surprised, as even he and Schweitzer had only sensed mana at the age of 7, marking the boy as a true genius. Perun then revealed that he had reached the 4-star stage by the age of 17, though he had listed his age as 20 on official records. When Lucas asked why, Perun confessed that he had never shared his honest feelings before, but because it was Lucas, he would admit that he viewed his talent as a curse. A heavy silence filled the room after the truth came out, as Lucas and Perun simply stared at one another. Perun eventually spoke of a former instructor, a 6-star magician and vice master of the 5th Magic Tower, whom he described as a knowledgeable man with a white beard reaching his chest. He recalled how much he had loved the man's gentle teaching methods, and how his kindness had originally sprouted Perun's own will to study and enjoy magic. However, everything changed shortly after Perun reached the 4-star stage. He explained that one day he had asked a question his teacher could not answer, resulting in the man becoming completely enraged and calling him a monster. Perun noted that the man's face had been filled with terror, as if he had been hiding a sinister fear of Perun's terrifying growth deep in his heart. Since that day, Perun felt he had lost his path. Though he still studied, the memory of that face surfaced like a curse whenever he tried to immerse himself deeply in magic, stopping his advancement. He admitted to cursing his own talent tens of thousands of times, believing that if he were only ordinary, he could have learned magic with more passion and without being labeled a monster. Lucas walked up and tapped him on the shoulder, telling the younger man to stop being so cheeky. He explained that there was a state called the pinnacle of magic, that even those with amazing abilities could never reach if they lacked the proper motivation. Lucas insisted that if Perun allowed himself to be unmotivated by the jealousy of an unqualified instructor, he would never reach that height. He assured Perun that by the time they met again, he would have reached a state several times higher than his current one. Perun questioned if Lucas was being confident or merely conceited, to which Lucas replied that he expected Perun to do the same. The mention of the demigods perked Perun's interest, leading him to acknowledge their existence as despicable gods who controlled all intelligent beings and manipulated the laws of the world. Lucas argued that it was humanity's fault for not realizing they lived under such tyrannical rule, yet he maintained that humans still had the potential to rectify the world if they did not give up. He told Perun that while his current talent was enough for an extravagant life at a magic tower, only a pursuit of the pinnacle of magic would suffice if he wished to defeat the demigods. The room fell into an empty silence until Perun sighed and laughed, noting that it seemed a teacher was not the only person who could show someone their path in life. He asked if Lucas was essentially telling him to fight against his family and find his own way. Lucas did not respond directly, instead thinking of his own past with Schweitzer and exhaling as he told Perun that he would always be one step ahead. Perun called out that the next time they met, he would be the one in the lead. Lucas smiled at the newfound attitude of his friend. While outside the door, Isabella stood listening to the entire conversation, her eyes tearing up at their words. In the morning, Lucas stood outside with his bag, breathing the fresh air and noting it was a perfect day for his journey to continue. Isabella appeared and asked if he had planned on leaving his baggage behind. Lucas expressed surprise, noting he didn't believe he had any, which Isabella found saddening. She reminded him that he had previously called her a burden and a hindrance, yet she declared her intention to follow him. When Lucas asked about the academy, she explained that she planned to study magic to its limits and saw no reason to seek another teacher when the history's greatest mage was standing before her. Lucas warned her that she might regret it, but she walked past him, stating she would not repeat herself and that she would follow him to the end of the world even if the path led to hell. Lucas smiled and followed her as they began their next journey. Meanwhile, inside the Blake Manor, Sir Patrick arrived to speak with Lucas's brothers. He informed Michelle that Peruan and the youth seemed to be more than ordinary acquaintances, noting how Peruan had publicly declared the boy his most valuable guest at the banquet. Michelle, a floor master, asked why he should be interested in who his little brother got along with, and eventually ordered the man to leave. Once alone with his second brother, Haynes, Michelle remarked that it was unexpected for Peruan to consider the boy a good friend, suggesting even trash might have a useful moment. When asked for his opinion, Haynes claimed he was not interested and felt it was not surprising for them to be close since they attended the same academy. Michelle decided he should report the matter to their father to see if the connection could be used to their advantage. As Michelle walked out, Haynes looked outside with a sense of discomfort, his thoughts lingering on his brother. The following day, Isabella questioned Lucas concerning the use of this strange object. He explained that he had received it from Shepherd Jun as a form of qualification required to take the entrance exam for his circle. Isabella noted that joining a secret organization dedicated to fixing the world seemed the best plan of action to gather more information about the demigods. She admitted that she had never even heard the name demigod until recently, reflecting on how they were only taught that the 5 heroes were great masters trying to rectify the world. It was a startling realization for her that the enemy they had faced were demigods, leading her to confess that without Lucas, she would have dismissed their existence as a mere conspiracy theory. Lucas observed that the scariest type of domination is the one invisible to the eye, as those under such a rule lose the capacity to think for themselves or plan their own futures. He described how such people simply let time pass, eating what is given and becoming happy slaves drunk on a false sense of satisfaction, entirely unaware of their own control. This, he asserted, was the current state of humanity. When Isabella mentioned that they had lost against the demigods, Lucas laughed and corrected her, stating that he had never lost and was, in fact, currently in the process of winning. Isabella offered an apology for her mistake as they finally arrived at the magic tower. Isabella was immediately shocked by the sheer size of the structure. Lucas looked upward, noting to himself that he had half a year before he could join the circle, a time he intended to use to stabilize the frozen river's energy and regain his original strength. A sense of nostalgia washed over him as he recalled how he had once immersed himself in magic studies in such a space with his former companions. Their attention was soon drawn to a group of dark elves walking behind them, resulting in Isabella questioning why Lucas seemed so surprised. She explained that elves and dwarves were species now free to travel among human countries. Lucas realized he had read something similar at the academy, but found seeing them in person quite surprising, noting that such a thing never could have happened 4,000 years ago. He recalled that the elves had managed to nullify the entire jungle in the far north as their territory. One of the elves looked at Lucas as they passed, and he returned the gaze calmly. Inside the tower, the space was filled with people engaged in both mana-based martial arts and normal magic training. Isabella spent time meditating on the floor, practicing a battling technique she had learned from Lucas. Upon finishing, she felt she had finally grown used to the movements. Her attention turned to Lucas, who appeared to be dancing in the middle of the training area. A bystander asked if he was her friend, mentioning the many rumors roaming the tower about the odd person who performed a weird dance all day and stayed in the library all night. Isabella laughed, acknowledging that his movements did indeed look bizarre at first glance. However, now that she was familiar with the battling technique and could read the flow of ki, she saw something incredible. She realized that the moves hidden within his dance were astonishingly high-level martial arts. He attacked at speeds the naked eye could not follow before returning to his initial position, creating the illusion of a heavy, flowing dance. While the other man remained confused, a loud thud came from the corner as a man fell to the ground and yielded to an elf he was fighting. The elf called the human weak, prompting a female elf behind him to scold him for being disrespectful to someone who had admitted defeat. She questioned if this was the warrior attitude he had been bragging about, addressing him as Liamson. Liamson apologized to his master and helped the man up, but his attention was suddenly pulled toward Lucas. Isabella recognized him as the dark elf who had been at the front of the group outside. Liamson walked toward Lucas and asked if he was a magic warrior. Lucas paused and identified himself as a magician, This claim shocked the elf, who couldn't believe those were the movements of a mage. He addressed him simply as human, but Lucas corrected him, instructing the elf to call him Frey. The elf introduced himself as Liamson, and, driven by a sudden urge to test what he had seen, asked Lucas to fight him. Lucas expressed a flicker of surprise upon hearing the challenge, leading the dark elf to clarify that he did not mean a lethal fight. The lady behind him quickly provided the correct term, suggesting a spar, which Liamson eagerly adopted. Their master then appeared before Lucas, introducing herself as Camille, and noting the presence of both him and the cute lady by his side. Isabella politely identified herself as Isabella Trisnine. Camille offered an apology for disturbing their training, insisting that Lucas need not pay any attention to the moron's words. This sparked a brief argument as Liamson protested the title, resulting in Liamson begging her to stop embarrassing him. Watching the exchange, Isabella noted that she had never heard the Elven language before, yet Lucas suddenly surprised everyone by responding in fluent Elvish. He mentioned that he did not mind and was always available for a spar. Liamson was stunned that a human could speak his tongue and smiled, remarking that Lucas was an interesting person. Lucas returned the sentiment, noting it was equally interesting to find an elf who was learning human magic. Liamson laughed, observing that Lucas spoke with the weight and tone of the clan elders. As the two prepared, a murmur ran through the onlookers, with some wondering if the dark elf was simply there to bully the humans. Liamson took a stance that radiated the energy of a nocturnal predator, appearing like a beast ready to pounce. Lucas observed the unique and elaborate movements inherent to dark elves, but in an instant, Liamson dashed forward and struck with his feet. Lucas swerved to dodge the attack swiftly, resulting in a look of surprise from the elf. Liamson continued his assault, parrying and launching a barrage of kicks, but Lucas evaded every single one. He recognized the soundless shadow steps and knew the key to those movements lay in the placement of the feet. Despite Liamson's increasing speed, Lucas began to dodge with even greater ease, eventually using his magic to thrust the elf straight toward the ground. Liamson tumbled but caught himself before falling, leading Lucas to remark that he moved like a wild animal. Liamson smiled at the praise and screamed with excitement before dashing back into the fray. The clash became incredibly heated, leaving the surrounding mages shocked by the ridiculous speed of the combatants. They questioned who this white-haired human was, seeing him stand on equal footing with Liamson, the next leader of his people. Both fighters used their knees and legs to strike with such force that they were thrown backward by the impact, landing on the ground huffing and puffing heavily. Camille watched Lucas closely, noting that his muscle mass confirmed he was not a magic warrior. Yet she wondered how such a skinny body was successfully blocking Liamson's heavy attacks. She recognized the unbelievably precise use of mana Lucas exhibited, causing her to marvel at who this 20-year-old truly was. Finally, Camille shouted for them to stop, stating that sparring further was meaningless. Liamson smiled and praised Lucas's incredible movements, to which Lucas replied that the same applied to him. Lucas noted that if they had been fighting in the wild at night, he likely would have been overpowered, and he observed that Liamson did not seem used to hand-to-hand combat. Liamson began to laugh at the observation, and asked how long Lucas planned to stay at the tower. Lucas replied that he might stay for half a year, while Isabella gave him a rag to clean his face. Liamson found this to be great news. Camille admitted that Lucas's skills were impressive for a human, but her gaze suddenly locked onto his earring. She stopped mid-sentence, leading Lucas to ask why she had cut herself off. She shifted the topic, asking why he had come to the third magic tower specifically. Lucas explained that he wanted to brew a certain elixir and had chosen this tower for its specialized books. Camille noted that this explained why he shut himself in the library every night. The crowd continued to whisper, realizing that the man they had dismissed as a weird dancer was casually chatting with the leader of the Dark Elves. Lucas paid the onlookers no mind but confessed to Camille that the tower might have been the wrong choice, as he had not found the information he needed even after going through all the books. Camille then pointed out that the public library only contained grade 3 books, and suggested he look into the magic books. She explained that to read grade 1 magic books, he would need to pass a specific exam and receive recognition from the third-floor masters. When Lucas asked when he could take such a test, Camille smiled and informed him that he could do so as early as tomorrow. Did you like it? Did you like that?
Which part?